Travis, man, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I've never done one of these before.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. For those who don't know, we met at the Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy. You were my class counselor.
Hey, best in the game, right?
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Yeah.
No, that was awesome, and we just stayed in touch ever since. So,
That was a long time ago. What year was that?
2018.
2018. I'm 28, so it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I'm joking, right? I've never even entertained doing one of these before because I can't imagine anybody wants to listen to what I have to say unless they're being forced to, right? So, but yeah, this is cool. Like I've looked at some of your stuff, and what kind of convinced me was you were SRO one day at my kid's school.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, you're walking around like a tactical ninja. And I was like, hey man, like that's good. That's especially as a parent, and now that I'm a little further away from the law enforcement piece, it's like, oh man, I need somebody there to defend my folks in my absence.
Yeah.
It's just kind of cool.
It's So I want to talk about how you got into Toledo, Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy, and then like your law enforcement, and like before that your military experience. Can we kind of go like soup to nuts, like what started and where you're at now?
Yeah. So I was born around here, Tullahoma, right off the mountain, Tennessee.
Okay.
So it's like right in the middle of Tennessee. Was raised kind of around. My mom was a single mom. My dad was like just he was in the Marines.
Yeah.
Didn't work out for him, and then he took some other paths and died when I was young. It's a terrible story. But, I was raised, had some great positive people in my life. Two of them were law enforcement officers.
Okay.
Which I had an uncle that was kind of like my dad, especially as the older I got. And then one of my mother's husbands.
Okay.
He was a law enforcement officer, and we had a kind of a mixed relationship, but it was overall positive, right? Mm-hmm. So I grew up, I was a rough kid, and I grew up predominantly in Nashville. Didn't necessarily graduate high school, right? So, and that's kind of where the Marines kind of came in.
Yeah.
So, again, I wasn't slow or anything, although some people would see some evidence to suggest that I had a hard time paying attention and definitely didn't care about education. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I got out, got like a GED, joined the Marines. So I went to the Army first and was like, hey, I want to do Army. I didn't even have like anything in mind.
Yeah.
I was never like, I want to do this. They told me I could drive a truck. I was like, nah, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So went to the Marines, obviously. Had a really cool recruiter. He, basically, I came, and knowing what I know now, I showed up in like December, I was like, I want to go tonight, and he was just like, yeah, I need you. So
yeah. We're hurting for numbers.
We're hurting for numbers right now. Yeah. So, I went to Parris Island. I don't really remember that place other than like, this sucks.
Yeah. It's kind of a blur.
The only thing I remember, and I've told the story to a couple people, that really kind of resonated with me was when I first, and this is kind of weird because I got headphones on, is that when I first went to Parris Island, and you're a Marine, right? Mm-hmm. So, like that first like 3 to 5 days is like, yikes, mm-hmm. right?
You don't sleep much. It's like, it's almost like a dream or a blur.
Yeah, it's scary stuff, right? And so I'm in this hearing booth, and I'm like, if I don't hit the button, they're not going to let me, they're going to let me go home, So it's like beep, and I'm like looking around, and then, and eventually they're just like, I mean, it's loud, and I'm just like,
yeah.
Stuff. So, so anyway, so this guy, drill instructor comes in, brings me outside, and he's, lean and mean, and, and he's basically like, takes off his hat, and I'm like, oh, this guy's going to murder me. And he just basically says, hey man, everybody's scared. I was scared. You don't want this to be something that you're talking, he had that speech with me.
Yeah.
And it was basically the speech of like, just embrace it.
Mm.
And I was like, yes, sir. And he's like, then he calls Sergeant, sir. You can imagine what happens. Sends me back in. And then of course I hear it. And then after that point, and I wouldn't say that was a defining point, but I remember just being like, all right, cool. This is going to end at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But I went through that, and that was cool. And, and joining the Marines when I did in the late 90s, it's like, there's not a war going on, right? So it's just like, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to do things. Ended up getting out of that. Went into 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines out in Camp Pendleton. That was cool. Got to play that, barracks game. Mm-hmm. We immediately deployed. Yeah, I got to play like show up at the barracks, hang out with the boys. There were no girls, obviously, at that time. And we deployed to on a Westpac. So, you basically get on a boat, and we went to like Australia and all this crazy stuff. And, we did some really cool stuff. But the thing about it was I'd never been out of the country really. So, at 18, I'm like a picture of me in Australia. Like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah.
See if we can drink every beer in Australia and Thailand. So that was super positive. So at the end of that, 9/11 happened. So yeah, so we were on
Wow.
deployment, and it was like,
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So obviously we got turned around, and then that's when the deployment started for me. We did that, came home for like a couple months maybe, and then we redeployed. And I thought we were going to go to, we thought we were going like back to Afghanistan, but we were part of the Marine Expeditionary Unit that invaded Iraq. So it's easy to look back and go, yeah, you see these things happening. Hey, we have no idea about Iraq because I'm 19 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch the news. I don't have a cell phone. We're just kind of waiting until Friday to go party till Monday morning, right? So we deploy again. We go to Iraq. I think we were at like Camp Matilda or something, right outside.
Mm-hmm.
I think the base was called like Doha or something like that. And then they attached us to the British Royal Marine Commandos. So that was cool. And, we had trained with the British on our first deployment, just like saw them, made fun of each other, went our separate ways. Right?
Yeah.
So this time that we were with them, especially during the initial push, a town called Basra, and we went up to Nasiriyah, and then and this is not me acting like some war hero because I'm not, but like I was there when they did the Jessica Lynch thing.
Okay.
We were like a what I can only assume was, hey, y'all start firefights over here while the high speed guys and gals go in and get her. But we were sitting outside of the big tower that she was at, so that was pretty cool.
Wow.
And I remember them telling us like, hey, y'all are part of a rescue, and we were like, who cares? At the time you're just like, so. And
Yeah.
now it's like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. What year was that? I can't remember.
Probably 03.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was weird. It was wild, right? So we did the invasion piece. We did that piece. Went up, kind of toured the area. Went on like a spring break, right? Significant events of that. Met some really cool dudes. Engaged in combat for the first time. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Still kind of don't. Which is kind of odd.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing dudes in civvies there. Because we were doing things and they would be like, go grab, And when I say me, I was like a brand new NCO. I was just like, where's the water? Where's the ammo? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, my bosses were getting led by other people and we were going and doing things and picking people up and taking them places. And, I remember we ended up in a village and we were like burning propaganda one day. And I was just like, this is kind of cool. You know what I'm saying? And, again, nothing high speed or anything, just, regular Marine stuff. Right. But I met all these dudes that were like in like civvies and stuff. And I was like, hey man, I kind of want to do that. And I'm assuming they were contractors or something, JSOC contractors or something, or agency dudes or something. And we would take these people and I'm assuming they were being interrogated. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. And I was like, I probably want to do that or some version of that. And then that kind of translated into like, what's more practical, right? And this will kind of lead into something else. But when we got home and when we went back again, when I finally got done, right? My contract was up, right? I had this like first sergeant. And he later on, he like became a sergeant major and like lost one of his legs. And he's just like this real like prolific, just badass. And he was like a Yankee, and he's like had this strong accent, but he had all these like wisdom nuggets that he would give you that was, very positive. He sat us down and he told me about this book, and then he gave it to me, and he was talking about how this is the beginning of like a Vietnam. I'm like, wow, foreseeability, right? He was like,
Wow.
hey, you will retire fighting these wars, and I was just like, what do you talk? Because because at the time you don't think about Afghanistan and Iraq being wars. Mm-hmm. At all, right? Because like when on my first deployment, we hit like, I think a country called East Timor. Never heard of it, right? And there was something going on, and then we like got off there in case this bad situation got worse. So we had no idea. We just like machine gun. I'm here. You know what I'm saying?
Because most of it wasn't it. They hadn't declared war, or had they do? Because wasn't it like a security thing for the most part?
I have no idea. We didn't know anything. All I knew is I heard Jennifer Lopez got killed,
Yeah.
and I was upset. I was like, no, but yeah, you don't really know what's going on. I mean,
Yeah.
You just miss a whole year of your life or a year and a half, 2 years of your life.
But he had the precognition to know that it was going to be like a Vietnam type thing.
It was weird, right?
That is very
Because like
weird.
when I was getting out, I had all these re-enlistment options like everybody else, nothing special. I had all these options, right? Mm-hmm. Just like everybody else, and you say, hey, I'm going to get out and go to college. Like that, realistically, that's not something that I was going to do. I ended up doing that, but much later. But I had this thing where I could do EOD. I went to this like week drill sergeant thing or drill instructor thing. And they said, that's a go. And I had in doc for the force company twice and made the last one. And that was something that I had thought about, but I wanted to do, there was a thing called Anglico. It's not even a thing anymore, but they were going to bring back Anglico, like airborne FOs. And that was like kind of my jam. So I was like,
FO like Forward Observer.
yeah, it's a forward observer, but it's like, it was something that happened, like, I think in like the Vietnam era. And the word was they were going to bring it back. So there were people that were getting excited about it. And where I was at Camp Pendleton, which is like Los Flores, that was like where that was going to be. And it ended up being MARSOC, right? So like MARSOC or some version of that. I think there was like 5 or 6 different versions of that before it actually happened. Anyway, so I did all that. I evaluated those options. I had this first sergeant around. He's like, hey, dude. Well, he wasn't like, hey, dude. He's like,
Hey, Brain.
yeah, hey, psycho. But, and he was just saying, he was saying that. He's like, hey, I'd be, remiss if I didn't at least bring up, like, hey, y'all are entering into a career of conflict. And I was like, man. And at the time, I really didn't care what he was talking about, which is rude, right? But that's just kind of who I was. And, looking back, I was like, man, what foreseeability.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And he was completely correct. I've got friends, and I'm sure we all do, that stayed in the Marines or stayed in the service till full 20 active and 16, 17 deployments. I mean, one of my very dearest friends, he has 14 or 15 deployments to Afghanistan.
Good gosh.
Yeah. So he's a different dude now, though. And we're all different people, but I wonder if that, there's no wonder. I mean, clearly affected him. So,
well, especially with the withdrawal and how all that went down. I mean, you have.
Yeah. I mean, but
what are your thoughts on all that?
Okay, so I'm not, one of the, and I'm not going to trash anybody, and I don't think, nobody cares what I think, right? But
I do.
Oh, thank you. But it's very fancy to get very attached to these interpreters, right? And, because there are good people that are, I'm not saying that they're bad, and they serve the country, they got paid very well, or moderately well, and you form these attachments, and then we leave. And are there Americans there? I would imagine so, right? Are there Americans? Or I would say that there's also Americans that chose to stay, which is not the conversation that we're having. But these interpreters are employees, and there was people in anywhere you go. I was just in Poland for a year, contracted people to cook, contracted people to wash the clothes. We had interpreters, and it was kind of the same relationship, except we weren't in combat clearly. Well, there was combat for good food because there's none there, but that's another conversation. But and they're going back and they're doing all these things. And I think a lot of these guys that are retired, especially these like special operations guys, they're just looking for a mission. And this is just something that they can, and I'm not saying that they don't have a right to do what they want to do, but I've just heard this conversation like 1,000 times. Like, we're going to go across enemy lines and go back and get, and it's like, okay, cool. Like, if you put that energy in something else, you could do great things. Right. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But we went down a tangent on that, but
it's all right.
Yeah. So anyway, I got out of the Marines, right? And he gave me this book, and I actually brought it for you.
Yeah.
So Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, right? And so the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, this guy, the summation is like, he was in, gets out, and then he comes back in within 6 months because life just wasn't going his way. And then you kind of keep the same rank, right? So if you got out for 6 months and then you came back in before the 6 months, then you kind of come back in as a E5, still get your time in service. And I think you can actually kind of come back to the same thing, but it's irrelevant, at least at the time. And so I wrote on the calendar 6 months, and I was like, hey, if I'm in a good place in 6 months, I'm staying. If I'm in a terrible place, I'm coming back, right? There were bags I didn't unpack because I was just like, hey, let's see how this goes.
Wow, yeah.
And
what year was this?
4.
Okay.
Yeah. And it worked out. It clearly worked out.
Yeah.
And it didn't help any that, so my unit goes back after, I get out, we did basically 2.5-ish deployments, come back, I get out, a bunch of us get out because we were kind of over our time, some of us. And then they go back, and then they all got they got hit hard.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't like to say my privates, my lance corporals, you know what I'm saying? But that's the lingo of the Marines, right? Like, you're a sergeant of Marines, a corporal of Marines, right?
Right.
Well, the guys, when I was a brand new NCO that were privates, they're all NCOs now. And a bunch of them got smoked, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
So and this is like the introductory days of social media. So you don't really know anything. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I wonder what that dude's doing. Like, hey, I know that guy. And they're like, hey, he died last year. I'm like,
wow.
Oh, wow. Man, he was a good dude,
Yeah.
And, and so, and that's weird, right? Especially when you see people that that are young and then they pass, it's kind of tough. Because you would kind of hope people, do go off and do great things. And that's what I loved about the academy so much is I got to see people leave and just do all these phenomenal things. And it's very rewarding to just kind of look from afar.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, that guy's annoying, but he's doing great.
If you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to use deadly force to defend yourself or to defend someone else, then you're going to want a good legal team defending you after the fact. And that's why I trust Attorneys on Retainer. And if you want to see how AOR compares to those other CCW insurance providers, then scan this QR code or check out my affiliate link in the description. They have individual and family plans so that you will be legally protected should you ever need to protect your life or someone else's life. And don't forget to use promo code DAD to save $25 on your initial sign up.
So you got out, everything worked out. That 6 months had passed, and
6 months had passed.
What were you doing at that time?
Weird again, right? So I had this my wife is gonna kill me if she watches this, which I hope not kill me, but I wanted to work at I don't know if I watched Roadhouse too many times or something, but I wanted to be like a bouncer. I thought that was a thing, and I was like, I'll just be a bouncer and I'll just hang out at bars and strip clubs. And terrible idea. So I got this job where I was like bouncing, and I would kind of go fill in for, it was basically like I was like the guy that would like fill in for people when they didn't show up. But and it paid fair. I mean, when I say fairly well, I couldn't get a job anywhere. I tried to like apply to like NES, like the electric company and stuff. I never got a call back. High school education, Marine, nobody cares, right? So, I was doing that, and a couple crazy things happened. Like, guy pulled a knife on me, but hey, drunk guy with a knife, and I'm 23 years old and just got out of the Marines, and I'm sober. Like he trips and falls, and I take him down, and the cops come and arrest him, and then we're in Nashville. It's kind of a thing. And then, I saw a couple of like really, really bad assaults while working as a very short amount of time. And my uncle was basically like, hey, this dude, I can't remember what happened, but he like quit the academy from like a small agency south of Middle Tennessee. And they were like, hey, they're looking to put somebody, but they need them to go like now. And they need somebody that can pass. And I was like, I mean, I'm not super smart, but I'm fast. Because I guess they were falling out or something, I don't really know what that means. Oh, I know what it means now, but I was like, be a cop. I was like, no thanks. Not really my thing. But then I remember like growing up, and I was like, man, I always wanted to do that, but I always wanted to be like a detective or a SWAT guy, And I had an experience in California when I was at Camp Pendleton, where I saw an officer-involved shooting. And like we were very close to it, and it's kind of silly. Like I Googled it a couple of years ago, and it's like Googleable. Is that a word?
I think it is.
I think it is.
It is now.
And so what happened was like we were, when you're a brand new corporal, you're an NCO, and then they're like, hey, we need an NCO to do this right here, right? I'm like, I'm in, and they're like, you're gonna be an MP for 3 months. I was like, that sounds great. I'll try it. Gate guard. I was at the gate, right? So I was like, oh man, this is terrible. So I'm basically over 5 or 6 E3s, E4s, and we're manning the gate.
And this is at Pendleton?
This is at Pendleton.
Okay.
For like 3 months, right off of a deployment, and we're about to go right back. So I was just like, they gave us like 45 minutes of training on how to check an ID and salute with the right hand to the, the officers that came through the gate. At the time, they had stickers on their cars. Right?
Yeah.
And so we worked the midnight shift because, I was the brand new NCO, and we went to Del Mar, which is like a barracks on Pendleton, but it's on the beach, so it's like pretty sweet. And we're drinking beers, right? We're just pounding booze, and it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. Now we've been up all night in our defense, and so the 5 or the 15 runs through. We see this car on the side of the road, not a big deal, and we hear gunshots. And we're like, that's weird, and we're like, utility bottoms, no shirt. Back when I was, handsome. And we see a guy laying on the ground, and we're like, and there's a chain link fence. So, I mean, it's not super far, but it's not super close either. So we like, do a tactical, recon / put beers in our cargo pocket and take off and just like see what's up. And there's like a lady yelling, and this car stops, and this like fit guy gets out, and he's like, hey, I don't know what he was, we don't know what he was saying, but he was saying something. And it was very apparent that like this guy has a gun in his hand. This guy behind this, because it was a tow truck. I'm assuming it was some kind of dispute. And the guy that's been shot is like crawling. So we're like, oh no, I know what that looks like, right? And we were like, yelling at it because we were idiots, and we were yelling at him and stuff. And I take a full beer and I toss it near his vicinity. 'Cause I'm bone stupid. And he starts yelling at us, and then we hear like the cavalry coming, and then the guy in the car is screaming to us like, "Hey, he's got a gun!" And of course we're like, "Who cares?" Because again,
We're
ridiculous.
10 foot tall and bulletproof.
Yeah, we're stupid, right? And so he's walking down the fence. Just for context, Camp Pendleton has a highway that runs right through the middle of it, right? So on either side, there's these giant fences that maybe now you couldn't get, but then it was just you jump over the fence, right? So cavalry's coming, the base cops, the CHIPs, the California Highway Patrol dudes, and they show up and hey, they surround this guy and they're backing him into a corner. When I say a corner, I mean like a field. And then, and they're like, don't do it, don't do it. And we're standing next to the cops and they're like, hey guys, get away. And we're like, no.
Yeah.
Hey, and then the guy pulls his gun, he pulls the trigger. He never finishes the squeeze and they just,
Smoke him.
they smoke him right there. And I remember the base MP officer dude shows up and he's like, hey, we need statements. And then he realizes, hey, these dudes are drunk, or intoxicated, right? We're off work, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, guys, we gets our statement, we go back and we had to go report it to the CO the next day, or at my company. And, and they basically just, all the command staff gets around and like tell, piece by piece. And
Yeah.
they're like, sounds great, dude. See ya. And I was like, okay, I'm not in trouble. Thanks.
Yeah.
But I remember when they were talking to me about being a cop, I was like, I don't really want to be a part of that. I just want to I don't want to show up and just be this use of force. You know what I mean? And so I told, getting back to becoming a cop, I told my uncle, yeah, I'm going to, I applied, I interviewed well. They hired me. And unbeknownst to me, I guess known to me, my father was kind of like a outlaw guy, like a biker, prison, in the jurisdiction that I became a cop, and I look a lot like him. So the cops that were senior, when I walk in, were like, oh no, the Russians are here, But it was kind of weird, and so I had this very weird relationship with several of them because they were had arrested my dad or had chased my dad, and so that was odd. And then went to the police academy. I graduated. I think I was an honor grad or something. I was like, because I remember when I graduated, I was like, they called my name. I was like, all right, I made it. And they're like, honor graduate. And I was like what? Which was cool. It made you get
That's awesome.
It was in front of my girlfriend and which is now my wife and my family. I was just like, hey, I actually,
Yeah.
I actually graduated from something. This is really cool. And then law enforcement for me was odd because I had this. I never wanted to make it, it never occurred to me to make it a career. It was just this is, I'm going to see if this works out. It worked out. I got into it. I was moderately successful at it in the beginning. And more than that, I had fun. It reminded me of the Marines because, but now we have girls involved. And so now we're guys and girls, and everybody's kind of the same guy or gal. And, we get out there and we solve problems is what you do. And I just really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it more than I wanted to say because I always thought kind of being a cop was
Yeah.
I don't really want to admit that this is a good time. And it's not about putting people in jail and stuff. Although there's reward in that because you're doing a good job and you're taking bad guys off the streets. But being able to solve these complex problems for people, for me, was that's a win.
Yeah.
It's a win. And when you got home at night and you're smoked or whatever, and you at least I did something. I didn't go to a factory and put boxes of chocolate chips into a machine for 8 hours. Although that'd be kind of fun. But yeah, so I did that, and I had a couple hiccups, man. I tried to go be to a larger agency, and I made it through the process, and then it didn't work out. And they kind of, these large agencies at the time, they would hire 70, but they only have 50 jobs, and if you didn't make yourself someone that they needed to keep, so a bunch of us that didn't have the college education that all kind of looked like me we all got let go. It was very odd. And knowing what I know now, I'd probably have a fancier house, you know, or at least, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, I went to go after that. So that happened. I was only caught for a couple months before trying this, and it didn't work out. And then I had like a 6-month break where I had to go. I was waiting to get another job in law enforcement. And I went to go work for Blackwater.
Okay.
And initially, when they hired me, this was like 2005, 4, 5. No, it's 5. Initially, I was going to Afghanistan to be on a personal security detail, but, you know, as the, you know, machine gunner or whatever. I don't think that I was like kind of slated to be like the cool guy, like with like, you know, the president of Afghanistan or whatever. I think I was going to be like the, you know, hey, this guy's funny, or hey, this guy can carry stuff, you know, which was cool. And, you know, it paid a lot of money, and it was like, I mean, it was more money than I'd ever seen before. So,
Oh yeah, 2005.
I was like,
Buku bucks.
yeah, it was like $12,000 a month after tax. I mean, it was $15,000, something like it was enough money that I was like, whoa, you know. And so all that happened, and I worked for them for a couple of months. I ended up in when was the thing in New Orleans?
Oh,
Was that 05?
Katrina. Yeah.
04? 05?
I can't even remember.
Might be 05 or 06.
Yeah.
So whatever time that was, I had just, so at the time when you worked for Blackwater, you had to go and do like a course. And it wasn't a course, it was more like a selection process. Not hard. The shooting. So if you weren't familiar with weapon systems, yeah, it probably wasn't going to work out for you. But, you know, as far as like, you know, I think they were just trying to see, hey, is this a guy going to cause problems? And, you know, obviously I made it through somehow. And then we were getting ready to go to, I guess we were going to go to Afghanistan, because they don't really tell, because you don't really get a boat, you know, like that you're going to go home, and then at some point, you know, you're going to go. And I interviewed with a couple of people that were like leaders that were going to be over, like, I would assume areas. And they were like, hey, would you be interested in coming and working for me? I'm like, absolutely. You know, a lot of it was over like phone, you know. And then New Orleans happened. And since I had like 37 minutes of law enforcement experience, I was now a subject matter expert in law enforcement. So they paid us Afghanistan money to go to New Orleans.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, I'm in, right? And I can't remember what year that was. All I know is that when that was over is when I started at this large sheriff's office here in Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
Because I left that.
I'm gonna see when that was.
Yeah, I left.
Look it up, Jamie. Oh wait, wrong podcast.
Is that the Joe Rogan thing? I've listened to that. That's pretty good.
Let's see. Was it Katrina?
I think so.
Yeah. Katrina.
I could get my checking account and see when I had money. When was the last time this guy had
2005.
Was
August
it 5?
2005. Yeah.
money? Okay, so that's when it was. Okay, so that's when I was at, right? So
Yeah. That's so can you talk about that? Like what'd you guys do? And
so it was odd, man. It was odd. So, you know, again, I'm nervous right now because I'm like, I know like all my friends are just gonna just roast me.
no.
You know, and that's fine. I enjoy it.
I get it all the time.
No. So yeah, probably. Yeah. Probably roast that beard, man. You know? But anyway, yeah. So I go down there, and it was so creepy because you don't, you know, you're a military guy, you're a cop. It's like you know, if you work for the ex-police department, they give you a list. Hey, this is the day you start. This is your duties and responsibilities. These dudes were like, hey, you're in. I'm like, sure. It's like an email. It's like, cool. Julie will call you. Julie calls. It's obviously somebody's wife, I would assume. And they're like, hey, what's your sizes? You know, shoe size, blah, 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 blah. Do you dip? Do you smoke? And I'm just like, ask me all these like crazy questions. They're like, hey, we're going to have a airline, have a flight. You want to fly to Nashville? And then we flew somewhere, and it wasn't New Orleans because obviously this was all going down. This is like while it was going down. And then we had like dudes and convoys pick us up. It was almost like, am I having like a mental episode here? Am I living in a fantasy? Like some weird flashback. You know, I was like, if they give me an earpiece, I'm out. You know. And but you know, they took us to this camp. I want to say we were in like Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it was run like it's all a bunch of ex-military dudes. So there's like logisticians, there's medics, and then everybody in the protection realm is like some version of obnoxious, right? like, I was X, Y, Z, you know, and it's just like, oh, and you have to, and the older guys, I'm sure were like, and I get it, because I'm like in my mid 40s now, and I'm like, hey, I'm never going to be as fit or as handsome as these 22, 23-year-old like infantry ranger dudes, you know? And so like, they were kind of like, it was like a toxic relationship because we were all getting paid the same money. And then of course, if you know me very well, I like to mess with people like pretty hard.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh man, you went through all that to make the same money as me. That's sad. Yeah. You must feel stupid, But anyway, so we get down there and a bunch of stuff happened. I remember we were, so it started off as like protection for people, like news reporters. And then like, I want to say like, there were some like political people. But then some of them had like Secret Service-ish people around them too. So sometimes we were like second or third court, like on the outskirts. And then sometimes they would be like, hey, y'all two go get a SUV and you're going to take this person to X. And Roger. So, it's pretty easy. Like one guy drives and whoever's driving, that's your only job. You know what I'm saying? Hey, that car never gets out of drive. Right. And then everybody else has like their job, and like the person that's in charge, that person's in, it's like infantry. It's just like basic infantry stuff. Like, and stuff that cops, I think, get wrong a lot is like, hey, if I'm if I'm in charge of this, like it's my decision and you don't get a vote until I'm down. And now you're in charge. Right. So it was very that. But we were loaded up pretty heavily in America, which was odd.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you like what
They gave us deputy. Yeah.
What was that lot? I mean, because it was like almost like a war zone, right? And did they declare martial law? Is that true?
Ooh, I don't know. I didn't have communications. We didn't. Yeah, I mean, I had a cell phone, and actually Verizon, you charged me $800 that month, that first month. I was like, but that's why I'm not with that company anymore. I'm still hurting over that, but so in the beginning they didn't care. They was just like, hey, we need a Band-Aid. And then after a couple of months, like I had been a post-certified police officer, so they were like, oh, all right, you're a gosh, I don't think I still have the paperwork, but it says like we were like not state troopers, but we were like deputized as state law enforcement under certain. It was very like shady gray. Now we weren't out there like enforcing laws. Man, we were, so like we went to like a bunch of like super obnoxious rich people's houses. And we kept having contact with law enforcement that wasn't positive, because not all law enforcement is the best. And I think, I've talked to some of these like guys that are like doomsday folks and stuff. And I'm like, hey, I don't disagree with you. Right. I've seen, in my life, I've seen a glimpse of this, and it was there. That's the scariest thing, because that's the scariest that's the scariest I've ever been, because, when you're in the military, Army, Marines, Navy, whatever, you got a function behind you. You got like this like war machine. So like if I go down, like there's a whole line of people that are going to pick me up. And when you're doing like contract work, wherever you are in the world, like that's not really there, especially now. Right. And then we were just, there was nobody to call because 911 didn't work, and, and then the lights were off. So when we were going around at night, we would roll around and we would have our windows down. Because it's Louisiana,
Super hot.
and you can't see because there's no lights. And then people were carjacking people and stuff. And I remember we went and got a bunch of money one time. And again, we weren't involved with the handling of the however much money, but we were on the outer cordon, and it was just like the federal, I would assume federal agents were the ones getting, they were moving stuff, right? I think. And then it was like people like pressure testing us, and we were just like, terrible idea, guys. And there was people, there were firefights. It was like one-sided, because like, like they would show up with a pistol, and we were like, we're running M4s and hard plates. Like, this is not going to work out for you, And, there's looting, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned conflict with law enforcement. Like, can you describe some of that, like the dynamics and why that was there?
So, I'm not going to, throw stones, but like, I don't think, and some of the, outer agencies had corruption problems. Again, not all of them, right? But you would have cops, the law enforcement there quit being cops, and they started just using the equipment. And because they're protecting themselves, right? And we would find, like, we went to this extremely wealthy person's compound, to grab specific items. And again, I'm a security dude. I'm not because at the time there was like an operations guy and then like the meatheads, right? So clearly I was not the operations guy. Yeah. And we showed up, there were law enforcement there. And we were like, time to go, guys. And they were like, oh, we're just making sure everything's secure. No, you weren't, And it was odd, and there was
were they like setting it up like their own base? Or like
they're trying to get into these houses. They were getting into these houses and looting them out. That's what we assumed.
Wow.
But there were like cars there, like SUVs that said like XYZ PD. And we're like, hey, can we help y'all guys? And they're like, hey, we're just making sure there's nothing going on here. Hey, it was weird. It was awkward. Especially I was a cop.
That's like, very bizarre, yeah.
Not really. I mean, you think about it, like the world stopped, man.
Yeah. I'm saying I'm coming from like where everything's functioning normal to like this little city, this area that's like basically
It's weird, man. It's weird because you're, if anywhere in the world, not in the world, anywhere in America, like you call 911, somebody's showing up, whether it's a fireman or some public service person. But like everything shut down, so like. The lights didn't work. The stoplights didn't work. And that's a real glimpse of like and then everybody's scared to death. Right. So like, you got people that are like overly panicking, cause like me or you, I'm like, hey, there's lights, in Biloxi, we went to Biloxi that one time. That place got flipped upside down. It's terrible. Right. Well, at least that's the way I remember it. Hopefully I'm not, remembering things that didn't happen, but there's desperate people, and these desperate people, because you don't want to say like, hey, like I don't have a car. Well, just if you walk a day, you're going to be, there's hotels. They're not open. Or Christian, they're full, but there's food, that's, so that was weird, seeing desperate people and not having the ability to help them because you're on mission and we're doing, we're doing things. And then the National Guard shows up and, they help in FEMA and then all these, and I don't want to say the crazies, but there's some like fanatical people out there. Cause like when they figured out who we were, everybody got weird. So like we were in this small town, I want to say Calcasieu, Louisiana. It's in the middle of nowhere. And, when we show up and we were making a lot of money and we had resources, right? So we would show up and we would say, cause what we were trying to do is get like, a local gas, if you've ever been to South Louisiana, there's like a gas station and it has like, they serve like chicken and pizza and breakfast and it's like a restaurant, but it's just like terrible.
Yeah.
It's delicious, like just fried food, And we'd be like, hey, like there's X amount of us, 3 meals a day. What do you say? $20 a meal? Who do I write the check to? Cause the funds were there. And they were like, cool, and they're, people are like bending over backwards because, again, some of these people are poor or their stuff got jacked up. But then when like the people in the community were like, hold up, and they're like Blackwater, and then they would Google it and they were like, oh no, y'all are, and then a lot of the guys are not me. I was just a regular dude, but some of those dudes are like, 6'4", juiced out of their eyeballs, Navy SEAL guys, and they're walking around and they won't shut up about it if you're with those guys, and they're out there partying at night, which, whatever, I did. I mean, not like that, but I was going out and drinking beers and stuff.
But yeah, people find out about that, I'm sure, and they're like,
it makes them uncomfortable.
They're like, they're supposed to be for just like war zone.
Yeah,
they're supposed to be for Iraq and Afghanistan. Why are you here?
Yeah, we were thinking the same thing. We're like, hey, I'm gonna hang out here as long as I can. If they're paying me Afghanistan money in Louisiana, okay, let's roll. Anyway, we did that, and then I'm not the most personable dude, I don't think, but I think I'm reasonably personable. And a lot of those guys, why they were so successful in whatever military profession they were in, aren't very cool to deal with. So I got tasked with this is my last one right before I went to work at this large sheriff, because I was trying to get back home, because I was like, man, this is not a sustainable thing. And I'm looking at these guys, and this is kind of like a theme in my life. I'm looking at like dudes that are like 15, 20 years older than me, and I'm like, I don't want to be that dude.
Yeah, you kind of see the direction that.
Yeah, they all have like ex-wives and kids, and then they're like, like my team sergeant was like this, like, like SF dude or something, or some version of that, right? Accomplished military school guy, cool, right? And he was like 45. He's like my age now. He's got like grown kids, and he's like dating a 23-year-old girl, and you're just like, he's talking about all this, you know, I was like, hey man, this is terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, this is I don't think this is gonna bring you the joy that you want. And, you know, and having those conversations with those guys that are kind of on that path, I was just like, I don't want this for my life. And
It's very one dimensional.
yeah, very like, yeah, you know, but you know, hey, I hope, you know, I guess probably what, 60 now? Yeah, 60 something. But, so anyway,
Dating 30-year-olds.
probably moved up to 30-year-olds. So, the last thing I did there was disaster relief sites, DRC, disaster relief sites. And this was a pretty cool, and I could have done this for a while because we were going in these small towns and we would go in with a bunch of money and we'd get with like the local infrastructure and, you know, mayor, police department, hospital. And we'd say, hey, we want to hire y'all. How much, you know, here's $2,000 a month. Let us rent out the back of the city halls, you know, whatever, where we're going to stay. And then we are going to set up like, you know, once everything was secure, because what was happening, I think at the time is that they were getting overrun at night. They were stealing everything and leaving, right? That was like a thing going on. So like we'd set up, and if you remember, they were, how old are you?
35.
35. So you probably remember like they were issuing cards like $2,000 and $2,500 credit cards with no PIN number to give to a disaster site. Really, there was like a lot of like, here's money, you know, to get you through, which is, you know, that's, you know, whatever. But those sites were getting overran at some point, and so we were pressure testing by going down there and, you know, basically setting it up and saying, you know, getting the infrastructure like i.e. internet, power, secondary, like all auxiliary power for like we'd go buy generators or bring generators. And then we would say, hey, you know, we'd kind of tell the locals, not like secondhand, like, oh, the cards are going to be here on Friday. Don't tell anybody, which they're going to tell everybody. And then Friday morning, there would be 2,000 people sitting outside like, hey, I'm here for benefits. That's what, you know, we were pressure testing that to see, you know, if people, you know, and a couple times, like when the cards first came out, like dudes like would drive by with like mask on and stuff. And we're like, great, we're going to be up all night tonight. You know? Because they thought they were there, going to go in there and steal them.
So y'all were just trying to determine the demand that would be there whenever the cards showed up, like how many you would actually need? Or
well, I think initially they sent like do-gooders, you know, like your mom, you know, not your mom specifically, but like, you know, your mom that's like a sweetheart, and they like gave her like these hundreds of $1,000s worth of cards, and they're like, hey, we're going to hand them out to people that need it. And, you know, that probably didn't work out very well.
So he's really naive and not security minded.
Like, hey, yeah, exactly. Right. So we did that for a couple of towns. One town in particular was really cool. And it was just like, man, it was like, long story short, we met a lot of people that were really cool, and they kind of gathered around us and really kind of brought us in. So I imagine like if something terrible happened, I imagine that's what it would look like. The people that kind of, I don't want to say survive, but probably thrive would be, you know, medium, small size town. Everybody kind of gets on the same page. And, you know, and this is a town north of New Orleans. Can't remember the name of it. But anyway, and I probably wouldn't say it on a podcast because that's where I'm going. But yeah. But anyway, so that was my time there. And then I came back to law enforcement, which was like, you know, that was my goal, to come back. And, you know, my wife was in college. She was graduating. She was like in her senior year of college.
Okay.
And I came back and I worked in the agency, the large sheriff's office. And, you know, I had a great time. I mean, these guys, they really took care of me. You know, I was involved in like a really serious shooting, like right out of the gate. You know, like I was in the FTO program. Yeah. So
Talk about that.
Yeah. It's you know, it's kind of weird because, you know, it's like me and FTO and the FTO guy is a good dude. Like super religious guy. Okay, I shouldn't say that. He's a religious man. That doesn't define him, right? He's a father and he's done great things in his life and his career. He's a phenomenal guy. And, you know, I was probably a couple weeks from working for Blackwater's, like, and that was like the big joke is like, you know, I'm sure the bosses were like, we just hired this Blackwater guy. And he just, you know, oops. Yeah. But you know, the circumstances were pretty cut and dry. You know, the handful of critical incidents, shootings, killings, or whatever I've been involved in. It's always like, you know, yeah, like there's no like worrying about, did he have a cell phone in his hand? Right. But we can talk about that too. But, so, you know, we stopped the guy and again, I was a different dude then, right? Because, I've always kind of like dabbled in martial arts. I've always loved jujitsu. I'm not great at it, but I've been doing it a long time. Dabbled in trying to fight just for fun. I don't, I just, I'm kind of silly. I like once you start getting hit, you're like, oh, this is a great time. And then when you get home, you're like, what was I thinking?
Wake up the next morning.
Yeah, you're like, oh man, I can't see out of my left eye. But anyway, so we stopped his car. He's definitely intoxicated, right? Pull him out of the car. A couple things happen. He's on parole. I grew up around criminals to a certain degree. So, he shows me his parole card, and I was like, cool. Which wasn't offended or anything. And he's just like, oh, I don't have any warrants. Which is like typically like, yeah. I was, hey, And then I was like, hey, everything good with you? And he's like clearly jacked up, right? Big guy.
Alcohol or something else?
All the above.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Yes.
yes. And, some things happened. I said something. I was like, are you carrying a firearm? Some version of that. And he was just like, huh? And he patted his pocket. And I was like, here we go.
You mean this?
Yeah. Whoa. No, but he patted his pocket. And I just said, hey man, if you got a gun, I'm not mad at you. Some version of that. Cause I'm under stress. Have always been moderately cool, which is training from the profession that me and you have done for my whole life, right?
I'm trying to keep him calm.
Yeah, and I just get I get focused, and I've in something like I was thinking about this because you have like some self reflection, which is hard. Is that I've never been super scared of people, and that's kind of my fear always happens post event. Like I get done with something, and I'm like, oh man, that's like in Iraq one time I called it a really close fire mission on a artillery battery and I was like close. And I just remember like not everybody, but everybody was scared. And I wasn't scared until we got back. And then I was just like, that was a terrible idea. Like so
like the what if games and stuff. Like when you
it's the what if games and it's like, hey, like that, because like, I don't know how if you know about our, especially artillery, like you calling around and, artillery guys are like, don't say check around, right? You're calling around and it's like, hey, fire for effect. And you're going to bring the, the platoon of battery, the whole battery of, whatever, bombs, and I remember, everybody being really scared. And later on in my life, I just realized that like when I'm in the mix, I'm cool. Mm-hmm. It's later on that I'm like, man, I should probably have done this and this, which is, I think everybody second guesses. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't even say second guess, like armchair quarterbacks himself, or at least you probably should, right? So anyway, during all this event, like, I'm not super scared of this guy. I was like, he's kind of fat. I mean, I'm fatter too now. So, but I touched where he touched, where I believe the gun was. And I felt a big knot of what I believed to be cocaine. And I could see the cellophane, Plainfield Doctor. And I didn't manipulate or anything. I pulled it out. Mm-hmm. I show it to my partner, or some version of that. And he's our FTO, seasoned guy. And then the only thing I remember is we were fighting, And I remember he hit me a lot harder than I expected him to hit me, which, he's probably scared to death, right? And then he pulled the gun out. I don't think he fired. I don't remember, though. I don't think so. But I remember thinking, like, hey, it's a small gun. As long as he doesn't hit me in my mustache, I'm probably good to hook, right? And then, I know I pulled my gun out, fired. The FTO fired too.
Are you guys on the ground or are you standing? Like
we're standing and we're fighting, and he hit me, and he hit me in the face a couple times. And I remember, and I had really good trainers, like the guys that I worked that trained us. Like they're, I don't want to mention their name because I don't want to embarrass anybody or make somebody say that they did bad. But I mean, they hit us with reps, and I remember like, hey, I strike, I pull my spray him. He sprays, and that's while the gun was coming out, and then I smacked the gun or some version of that, because I remember going, gun, that's, and then, we fired, and me and my FTO both fired, I believe, so we don't really know who killed him, but, I got a pretty good idea that it was one of us, but, he, guy went down, and I feel like, because when he hit me, I went down, and then I remember I picked him up and dumped him. I used to be like a big, strong guy, and I dumped him, and then he immediately got back up, and that's when I think that's when the gun came out. I can't remember.
Wow.
So he has arterial bleeding, And, my past experiences, I'm like, hey, man, this guy's got, and I remember I got on the radio and I said something like, whatever my number was. I said, hey, gunshot wound, neck, torso, arterial bleeding, some version of that, or one, whatever. And the guy that I was with, man, he'd been a cop for a while. So this is like his first time in his first radio in combat. So I was just like, everybody responds to it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And, I started, doing my thing where, you start, patching people up and trying to shut down the stuff. But, he died.
Was he hitting an extremity or the like torso
Right
area?
here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. So that's the one that probably killed him. That or up underneath his, like right through his lung area.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But, you see that arterial bleed and you're like, hey, this guy's not long for life. But, we tried to plug him up. I'm not going to, we tried.
Yeah.
All right. And, he died there and we were kind of on him, which is kind of odd. And then, but it was cool because I had some really like good supervision, right? So like, I had a guy, and this guy's still active, so I don't want to say, active law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Just, he came up and he said, I can't remember what exactly he said. I want to say he said like, are you okay? Not what happened,
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, I was like, man, that was really powerful because he cares about me. You know? So, and then he's like, and then they were just like, hey, don't say anything. Get a lawyer, And that's kind of what that's what was in their head. Like, hey, this guy's gonna get sued. He's gonna get indicted. I'd never met these guys before. How weird is that, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was new. Hey, I was like 6 weeks on the program. Like they, new guy.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if he makes it, we'll learn his first name.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on
That's
leave.
awesome that they responded that way because
Oh, they're cool.
I'm not going to say
Yeah.
the name, but my
Yeah.
former department knew some guys that got into a shooting, and first supervisor that came up to him said, "Why did you shoot the guy?"
Yeah, terrible. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, that's probably not the most appropriate. But everybody's going through, in a stressful environment. I think everybody's going through their own worst day, right? During things like that, So for me, at the time, if that happened to me today, I'd be probably more impacted because I'm older and I've got a lot more to lose. And I, when you think about mortality, the older you get, I think the more in depth you go into it, right? But at the time, I was just like, hey, I know it kind of sounds like nobody can be me, And if they do, like it's gonna be epic, right? But I wasn't super affected by it, right? So like, especially mentally. So, I go home or. They take your gun away from you, you know, and now they're doing the thing where like they take your gun and give you one and back. Like, come on.
Did they do it on scene? Did they disarm you on scene, or was it?
Yeah.
And I've always thought that's really weird. Like,
well,
at least take the person back to the PD to a safe area and then disarm them. I've always thought that's very strange that they do it that way.
They did it the most respectful way possible. I mean, they were trying to get me another gun, and then like one of the supervisors like came out and pulled his gun out and handed it to me, which is, I didn't need that. I guess it made you feel good about it, and yet you're not unarmed. But eventually we were unarmed, and I was kind of already kind of projecting my email that I was going to have to write to my dude saying, "Hey man, is that Afghanistan still open?" So anyway, so I had blood all over me because dude was bleeding, and we were working on him, and we wrote our statements and stuff, and it was pretty straightforward from what I recall. And the other guy, he had some issues with it because like we had to go through like critical debriefing and stuff like that, and and I always felt weird because I didn't feel bad, and he had just emotional response, which I totally get and is totally appropriate, and so. So we finished that up, and I was on leave for a little while, and excuse me, getting into incidents like that very early in your career is a curse, right? Because then you have this like automatic, this guy's legit. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I'm in the Army now, and like you see somebody with like a Ranger tab, you're like, oh, he's probably good at stuff. Not necessarily, usually, but like, like I had when I was a young platoon leader, I had a guy that had a special forces in the Army. They really care about like badges and stuff. It's very odd, especially prior service Marines. You're just like, what? Like you went to a school like 10 years ago. Who cares? But anyway, and but it's very similar to that. So it's like kind of like that badge that kind of gives you like legitimacy when, when in actuality I was still a rookie cop, and but and I think it probably accelerated my progression at that place, without me really knowing. I mean, nobody really said it, but like, I was on patrol, had a good time, had some really great partners. Went to a criminal interdiction unit, which was the best job I ever had. That was one of those, if you know what that is, yeah.
Let's talk about that. Why'd you like that so much?
I was good at it, right? I mean, when I say good at it, I was just lucky, right? But that was my, like, I'm not sitting there talking about military stuff, but like that was like my special forces, right? Because like I saw those dudes, not just at this agency, but at others, and highway patrolmen, and they had these like monster drug cases, and it's just like, it's like bass fishing, right? Like you see like Bill Dance holding a bass, and then you go out and fish for 8 hours and you can't catch a brim, right? And you're like, man, they must have magic, right? And but I watched these guys, and from a distance, I just was enamored by them, right? Made it on the team, but like, hey, I remember when I was interviewing for the job, I literally memorized the Fourth Amendment. I mean, not that that's that big of a deal, but I was very into it. And, and you're doing pretextual stops, and you're doing things that are especially as a young officer, on the edge of like legitimacy. And you're taking a lot of chances. Maybe not with your health, but definitely with, your civil liability, getting sued or whatever. But anyway, so I went to the interdiction unit. I initially wanted a dog. I'm glad I didn't get one, and then later on they offered me one, and I don't like dog. I love dogs, but I don't like dog stuff like dirt. I would like get in a car where a dog's been in it, and I was like, I can't do this.
It smells horrible.
Yeah, it's terrible. I'm not particular enough, but anyway, so I went there. I had some really good dudes that I worked with, and everybody. This is a generalization, but in interdiction, it's like the same dude, right? To a certain degree. There's like 2 or 3 different types. Like, in the Marines, there's 5 or 6 different types of Marines. Hey, the I'm here to blow stuff up guy. I'm here for college. My dad was a Marine, and I had to reinvent myself, whatever. But in interdiction, it's like everybody's like super aggressive dudes. And then there's different types of aggressive people, right? And then most, minus me, most of them are super intellectual, right? Like, not necessarily well read, but definitely have an intelligence level they're fast, which makes them typically funny, or at least clever, and then having a fear to be wrong, right? That's kind of the main pieces of it. So you're going to search cars, ask people to do uncomfortable things, and then not find what you think could possibly be there, right? So anyway, I did that. It was a cool story because like my first day, there was a guy on the unit, and he's now like in federal law enforcement. He's a great guy, but he was, on the team a year before me, and he was reasonably my age. So he, but he had taken the college path. Mm-hmm. Good guy, really good guy. Anyway, so and he was struggling because interdiction is hard. It's hard, or it's not, right? Which is kind of a odd thing. But he was struggling, and our boss at the time was like, "Look, if Travis hits before you, you're going back to patrol," which is great leadership.
Good gosh.
And I mean, I think it was more of a joke.
No pressure.
But it was like one of those, like joke that's not funny. So my first day, arrogant, not arrogant me, but if you like, this is not me, I'm trying to keep it in the, I cuss a lot. That's what I'm trying not to cuss. Is, I said, all right, interrogative, I'm going to hit today, and then we're all going to, and then we're taking off. That was at 7:00 in the morning. At 7:14, I stopped a car with like 375 pounds of weed in it. Hey,
good
complete first stop, first day. The guy that was training me, he had had too much to drink the night before, and he's still active, and he's a great guy too. And he was sitting in the car, and he was basically just telling me, "Go stop a couple cars, get a couple reps in. Let me nurse this cup of coffee, and we'll get rolling." And he didn't even have his gun belt on. I mean, he was
gosh.
He's in a bad spot. If he ever watches this, sorry. But there's a couple things that I walked up to the car, and they were 2 ladies, nervous, their reasons didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then they like handed me like a ATM card as a driver's license. And I was like, hey, wrong one. And they're just nervous, right? They just grabbed the wrong card. And, and she's telling me how much she likes my tattoos, which is, just odd. And so I got consent to search or a canine hit. I can't remember which one. And I remember I was so excited that like we have these bales of marijuana, and I've got pictures of it. It's very funny, and we're just throwing bells on the car, and then I'm like, like high fiving people. Hey, the rest of the unit's pulling up, and here comes our guy. That's
oh my god,
he's come and he congratulates me, and he's like, I guess I'm going back to patrol. And of course that wasn't true. I mean, he was just messing around with him, but we had forgot to arrest him. I mean, we did eventually, but it was just like. And they're just standing there. We're like, hey, yeah, turn around, put your hands
high fiving them.
Because there's nothing like it, right? So you stop that car and they've got something in the car that they don't want you to know about. It's painfully obvious, right? If you're looking for the right thing, right? I shouldn't say that. If you're paying attention, it's there. And but that was fun. That was the funnest time I've ever had in law enforcement. And I'm not saying I was the best in the world by any means. I'd won a national award or two. I hit a bunch of meth one night. I can't remember how much, a couple, like 20 or 30 pounds of meth. Like an international thing. When I say international, it was like really, really good methamphetamine that was made probably not in America. It was quite a bit. And then there was a bunch of ecstasy or cocaine in there. I can't remember. There's just a bunch, right? And then, there's times where you think something's there and it's not. So it's just like, it's like high end bass fishing, right? But I enjoyed that. But the problem, I wouldn't say problem. The issue with that is that the more successful you are there, the less you're going to get along with everybody around you. And looking back at what I know now, I could have probably used a little humility.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think you use humility, but why do you think the better you are in that, the harder you're going to have a hard time getting along with other people?
So, off the cuff, law enforcement, I don't want to generalize law enforcement, but where I was at, everybody, to include the supervision, we were all looking at the same thing. That's all we cared about. So, like, the guys that were the supervisions, were they in charge of us? Sure. But it wasn't like it was a very untraditional relationship because they are looking for a load too. They're not like sitting back and approving reports. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, we were all fishing in the same pond, if you use the fishing analogy, and we were all looking to be the best bass fishermen out there. And and the matrix for success was that. So if everybody's hitting around you, we used to call it walking through a desert. One of my very best friends in the world, he lives in Florida now, but he was on the interdiction unit, and later on we were narcotics together as detectives. And he spent like 2 months walking through a desert, i.e. he couldn't get a joint out there. He couldn't find a person with a civil warrant, and then we were hitting around him. Like, we would be parked next to each other. One of the other agents would hit 50 pounds of cocaine. He'd be like, and it's tough. And if you've done interdiction before, you're probably, if an interdiction group watched this video, they'd just be like, oh, and they'd just start telling stories about like, or teams hitting around you. Like the drug task force south of us would hit $400,000 and we can't make an arrest. So it's odd and fun. It's so much fun though. Right. And moderately, I would say, it seems dangerous, but the worst events I've ever dealt with are on patrol, right? So I think that's where the war is at. I don't think the specialized units, you're so ready for it that, my opinion, interdiction officer get killed, absolutely. The best one ever, Robbie Bishop down in Villa Rica, he got murdered on a traffic stop. So, I mean, that's like the Michael Jordan of interdiction. So, but anyway, that was a great time. And I went to some great schools. Had some just great experiences there. That was the funnest time I've ever had. And
how long did you do that interdiction?
I don't know, a couple of years. I probably should have mapped all this out before we had this conversation.
It's all right.
No, it's fine. I've listened to podcasts, but it's usually like people like talking about like drugs or, jumping off of cliffs or something. Not, being just a basic white cop guy. But
So
yeah.
you did that for 2 years and then
2 or 3 years.
Okay.
If that. And then I went back to patrol, but like in the supervisor.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was where I was looking at, going to a city police department, and that job had been offered to me at a kind of equally, and the reason I didn't go, you get disgruntled in something, and you can get disgruntled for a very legitimate reason or a not legitimate reason, and then all of a sudden you start looking for to pick fights with everybody, and that's the route I was going. I mean. But what I luckily had these great mentors, my uncle being one of them, my friend that was on the interdiction team, and my friend that was on the interdiction, he's 15 years older than me. So, these guys are like older guys when I'm still relatively young, and they're all like retired now. But, they were just like, hey man, just be mad at the dude that did you wrong. Right. And I was, I used to have to write that down, a version of that on a piece of paper. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. It's not the agency. It's just like one guy, and he has influence, and I'm mad that he has influence. That's it, right? And those things have obviously come and gone, and there's no hard feelings. But I went back to patrol, kind of fell right back into the same groove of enjoying myself and having a good time. Just like any other cop, man, you got trauma every day, and if you don't deal with that, then it deals with you, right? So, luckily my wife, we talk a lot. We still talk a lot. So I felt like I dealt with that trauma appropriately. Whatever trauma, dead children to, seeing people in compromised situations. And, and then I got into the training business of training and being a field training officer. I really enjoyed that. Right. And more like training's fun, but I used to like to play practical jokes on them. And, I would bet them that, I would go to people's house I knew, and then they would practice, because you're not supposed to like run tags that you can run somebody's tag like 28, 29, but like you don't want to, while they're learning how to do it, you don't want to run a tag and then like have a new guy driving and it's like, hey, it's a stolen car, that's just the way I did it. So I would just like go over to my friend's house and stuff, and I'd be like, hey, you see that tag? Run it for training. And then I would be like, I bet his name is blah, blah, blah. And they was like, how'd you know that? I'm like, by like the 7th or 8th one, they would be like, man, so
Experience.
Man, I can sit here and tell you, I loved it. But yeah, I got in the training game for that. And then that's when I was doing jiu-jitsu. There's a guy, he works for a state agency, in the drug game, or yeah, at the time, I think he was in the drug game. And, we're rolling. He's like, hey man, why don't you come work for the agency? It's a state law enforcement agency here in Tennessee. I said, cool, how do I apply? And he's like, well, get your college transcripts. And I was like, never went to college. So, and I've told him this before. I don't think he believes it, but, I literally left the gym and went and applied to college.
Wow.
And now I had VA benefits, not percentage, but like my GI Bill or whatever, post 9/11 GI Bill.
Right.
So, it's not like I like went into debt or anything, but I went to college and I started off taking, and I went and I got like, at the agency I was working at, I got like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off. I volunteered for it, which everybody was like, sure, So yeah, you want to work all weekends, but I was going to college, and we didn't have kids, and we were living in an apartment, so it is what it is. And so I took like 15 or 18 hours, and then I did summer school, and then I took 21 hours. So I knocked it out like super quick, and I'm obsessive about things, just like some people are. And
What'd you go to school for?
Political science, criminal justice.
Okay.
I initially was going to major in history and minor in French, so I picked up I went. I made it all the way to the end of but I couldn't. I had to take one more French class, and they didn't offer it till the semester after I graduated. So I was just like, and they were like, hey, you got a criminal justice and a political science degree right now, and I was like, let's go, yeah. And so anyway, so I graduated really fast, and I was on patrol, and in the midst of that, I got promoted to detective, and I initially got signed into a drug unit, right? And that unit was going through a humongous change at the time, and they were going from, a very good respected one to a giant respected one. And when I say giant, I mean just much bigger, and the scope of things changed. So where we were more focusing on large scale cases than just, college guy selling weed to his friends. Although we did those too, and and that's I feel like I had some success there. I don't feel like I definitely had some success there. I had a good group of people that kind of showed me the ropes, and they definitely took care of me where I wasn't good at, because everybody's got strengths and weaknesses, but there was like a sweet spot there, right? There was a couple of maybe 2 years, 3 years where none of us were competing for anything, because we were all kind of happy where we were at, and we were all like in new things, like Title III interceptions, like listening to people's cell phones under court order, and doing these, and then I got into undercover operations. And the undercover piece was really good for me because, I guess growing up the way I did, I kind of lived a couple lives, right? So it was very easy for me to kind of, go that route. And I had a great mentor, ATF agent. He's retired now. His name is Wayne. I'll say his first name. But this guy was like such what I needed, like I needed an older dude that was very, very like been there, done that, but wasn't like, wasn't judgy, wasn't he just really showed you. He would have been, and I think later on he went into training. He got into supervision, but he got into training, but at like the Federal Academy. But he was just so good at like showing you the why and showing you the what could happen and what right looks like. So, and we're still friends to this day. We just had lunch the other day, and it was really cool. He's an old man now, ish. But he did some very extensive undercovers. We did some pretty extensive undercovers together, and I really enjoyed it. And going through that process, I had applied once I graduated from college. I had applied to see, I'd get hired by DEA, ATF, and then I tried some other agencies, and I got hired by all but ATF. So I got an inconclusive on a polygraph. A bunch of us. So there was a year that several of us, everybody got an inconclusive out of the Nashville office. But we were all combat vets because they were like pushing a veterans. And you didn't pass it, you didn't fail it. But then I took like the DEA one. I was like,
it's so weird how that works out.
That's what I said. I was like, what am I lying about?
Yeah.
I told you some things I'd rather not say. But anyway, but it was good. So the government, I think like the government shut down one time in the middle of all of it. So I was going through this hiring process. I was a detective. We had our kid, our first child. It was awesome, and everything kind of, I wouldn't say everything changed because I don't want her to ever think that like she, like held anything back, because I really don't. I'm glad that all of that didn't happen, but DEA was the first one that was like, hey, it's like, here's your date. And that was right after we found out we were having twins. And
wow.
Yeah. So my wife was like, yeah, we're probably not going to do this. And it's not like she was like, hey, quit on your dreams. Because it was never really my dream. I just, back in the day, and guys are in their mid-40s can relate. We weren't making the type of money that they're making right now. And the feds were making like a lot more money than us. So like today, I don't know if going to the feds is actually a smart move, money-wise.
Yeah, it's definitely a massive commitment to go into that, especially realizing that
you got a young family.
Yeah.
Well, we had a young family, and the thing that was happening is that they weren't going to tell me where I was going. So DEA at the time, you wouldn't find out till week like 12.
Good gosh.
And I was just like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
In the midst of all that, I was still kind of adjunct teaching at the police academy, and they had a job opening for a DT guy that needed to. I think the thing was like, you needed to teach DT, which I was certified in. You needed to be able to teach drug investigation, special operations like SWAT. And it was like the big joke was like, hey, they just didn't. They didn't. One of the old instructors said on their or on the job announcement, they just didn't put 6'3", likes Coors Light, tells inappropriate jokes, So I think they were looking for somebody that looked a lot like me, right?
And this is what year?
2014.
Okay.
So I was in the unit. I was in our drug unit. And,
okay.
I had like long hair and beards, and I looked like I always joke. I looked like a professional wrestler that just wasn't quite big enough. You just wasn't. You're just maybe another inch, maybe another 40 pounds. But so I took that job, and it was a pay cut. It was quite a bit of a pay cut. and I didn't expect to be there very long because I was like, hey, the girls, my twin, you know, my children are going to be born this year. You know, the twins, we're going to have 3 in diapers. You know, I'd started graduate school. Terrible idea. And I'm going to need, I can't do, you know, because one of the things that kind of held me, one of the kind of things that made me kind of pause in my lifestyle was that there's a picture of my oldest daughter in a wire room with me as a brand new baby. So we were in the middle of a drug wire, and I'm talking like 2 days after the child was born. I was back at work. Terrible idea. You know, and that, you know, I'm not saying like, you know, I mean, I know dudes that like have kids that are a year old before they meet them. So I'm not acting like I'm dying on a cross here, but you know, if they're deployed or whatever, but my priorities, I have to really keep my priorities on a leash because I have a tendency just to turn the world off and do things that I feel that are important. Right. So anyway, so I hopped into this law enforcement game at the academy, which was absolutely not what I was expecting, right? Because I expected to go into the state drug unit, and it just never worked out. Just timing, you know. I don't really know why, well, but it just never worked out. I always made it to the end, and they went with, you know, somebody's kid. You know, I was just like, you know, so much so that like I applied like a handful of times, and like an investigative journalist like reached out to me and was like, hey man, blah 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 blah. And I was like, I'm not gonna, you know, and I wasn't gonna be a part of it for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I'm not gonna make any agency look bad unless they deserve it. And that was one person making a decision. Like getting back to that whole like it's not the agency, it's that dude. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, and that would have been a career suicide, I think. I'll get on the news and be like, they didn't hire me. And quit.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to hear somebody just yapping all the time. But anyway.
So why was the teaching at the, you saying that teaching at the state was not what you expected?
No, it wasn't what I expected at all.
Why was that?
You know, I came in a rebuilding time. So everybody, like when I went there, I was in my mid 30s and everybody was in their 50s. And they were teaching things that were, I mean, like
really outdated,
very outdated. And there were some great people there, and they were doing great things. But they were just like, you know, there's always a couple things that you're like, hey, this is a terrible idea. And the people that had, you know, defensive tactics is a thing that, you know, everybody is like, hey, I'm a defensive tactics instructor, and my question is like, you think that until you have to teach defensive tactics, right? So I had all these years of jiu-jitsu. I'd been a Marine Corps martial arts instructor, which I'm not talking bad about the Marine Corps. It's nothing. That was a PT school. I don't know. Like,
yeah.
Like, I remember we ran a 3-mile run with a gas mask on one time, and I was like, "What does this have to do with
fighting?"
Yeah. I was like, "We're really tough." Yeah. Period. Yeah. So you know, I'd been through all the instructor schools, and you know they're all good. So you know everybody thinks that theirs is the best one, but I think there's something at all of them, right? And I went there and I'd guest instructed. But when you guest instruct, you get to teach what you want to and what you're comfortable with. But when you got to teach the whole thing, you're like, oh no, I'm not what I thought I was. And it was very humbling because it was like, I was under the impression that I was a lot better at that than I was.
What was the most challenging thing with that, do you think?
Keeping it relevant and interesting, not being influenced by people that have motivations that aren't really aligned with your mission, right? So, this sounds like me being like critical, but I'm going to be a little critical. My argument for a lot of people is that if you want to teach, if your motivation is that you just want to be an instructor, that's a very good reason you probably shouldn't be one, right? You know, when you're teaching defensive tactics specifically, you're teaching everything pre-bang and post-bang. And what I mean by that is, you know, hey, how are you doing, to officer presence of how your uniform looks, to after a critical incident, assuming it's a deadly force incident, that how do you restrain that person while you're also rendering aid, or whatever that version that looks like. So it's a lot bigger thing than, you know, because in firearms, you're a firearms guy. You understand the the basic fundamentals of marksmanship. And then you probably have a couple tricks and a couple drills that help new shooters get on target, which I would assume that's a good thing. Right? Not the same. It's a good thing, right? But it's repetition. It's how many times correctly you're going to do X, Y, or Z. In most firearms training, they don't really talk about why or how to
No, they don't.
use that piece.
And that's what
Yeah.
we talked about yesterday with
really?
Hawk. Yeah, that exact thing of how
Oh, wow, great.
it's just this. We just shoot cardboard,
Yes.
and I've said before, I'm gonna use his name, but
Yeah.
we've talked about this where we both believe, or we've talked about how we think that like 80% of a department's budget should go towards sim rounds. And then the other 20% should go towards duty ammo and training ammo. And then once you can get on paper, now we're going to start shooting each other.
So that happens, so like when we were at the academy, like we had a humongous sim rounds thing. I mean, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds. And, and I think, and you could do a whole podcast or a whole lecture on just simunitions training. I taught at an instructor school for simulation training. And, and developing like the scenario and like what's the point of it, and then like training objectives within it versus, adult paintball,
right.
or, you know what I mean? Or, hey, I'm going to act like I'm just going to run in the room like a madman and just have two guns ablazing. It's like the training, it's fun. I used to always let them do a rep of that, right? Not always, but like in the beginning, I'd be like, all right, cool. Hey, everybody gets 10 rounds. Whoever gets hit the most has to do 50 burpees, right? You know what I mean? And that's fun because that, something that they want to do. And then now it's like, all right, every round counts and you're going to pay for every round, right? So, especially in like your short entries and I was really involved in the early active shooter stuff, where we would use rounds for, threshold assessments and all these, all the different types of ways to do the same thing is stop the threat, right? So
you were talking about how the defensive tactics, how you have to basically go like through the whole thing, left to bang, bang, and the right to bang, and the same thing but firearms is kind of lacking that too, where it's like we almost are just like
it's easy and it's easy to sharpshoot. I could, sit here and be like, the hamburger could always taste better. You know what I'm saying? But defensive tactics is hard because it used to be when I went through, it was like, here's a strike, here's a kick, here's how to stop a punch and a kick. Here's how to pull a weapon. Here's how to pull your, whatever your intermediate weapon systems are. And you got to do that. You got to do that, right? Because not every agency, some of the agencies like where you work, man, their defensive tactics program is legit. And when I say legit, it's extensive. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think it's probably pretty good. But, very rarely do we have there's a couple agencies throughout the state that when they showed up, were like, they're good. And that was one of them, because I mean,
we had some good DT instructors.
Yeah. And so anyway, so you're learning how to do, kick, strike, punch, do whatever you got to do, and then we got to kind of, but the main piece is your use of force options that are appropriate, right? And later, if you want to talk about it, I wrote a defensive tactics instructor's course in an evaluation that your agency actually uses now. Or your old agency that uses now, where you can evaluate their use of force options, and I think that's kind of where the money is, right? Is we want to teach these people a handful of things, not a truckload full of things, because there's a time piece, right? And then we want them to have their use of force options very similar to like a fast food place, a number 1 and number 2 and number 3 and number 4, and then when they get really, really, really good and really experienced about this and they get their head around it, then they can start, ordered off the a la carte menu, you know what I'm saying? Because are my use of force options, take out the lethal piece, are my use of force options going to be different than yours? I'm 280 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to be able to get away with some things and that you're not, or vice versa. So to say like, hey, you're going to learn this straight arm bar takedown, that's always the one people gripe about. And, is there a place for it? I believe there is. And I believe, for example, that technique, it does work if you do it correctly and you do it under the right pretense. But it's very easy for, that was one of our big things at DT, was that the outside people are always so critical. And I don't mind criticism, but when you criticize a program person or all the above to an impressionable young person, then all of a sudden now you have to win that person over to get through, And that was always my big pull, because like after the event, you could just say whatever you want about me, I don't care. But we would show up with people that would have like these super deep beliefs about things, not necessarily me, but the program, and then about halfway through they'd be like, oh, maybe this isn't real, maybe maybe I was told the wrong thing. And defensive tactics, that's
Like, what are some of the things they would think, like these preconceptions?
that it does. So this is like the and again, I'm, people can get upset about this.
Hey, it's all right.
I'd give the zeros. Yeah. Is you go become a DT instructor, or you're a part-time, because 99.9% of them are DT instructors, not full-time, right? So like, unless you're working at an academy, you're not a full-time guy, right? And that's who I was. I was a part-time DT instructor. And I had this like vision of what it should be. And what it should be is something that you get a Jason Bourne at the end of the 40 hours, right? It's not possible because some of these people have never been hit before. And if you've never been hit before, like, you got to get past that, and you got to go through all this, all these things. And we could talk hours about this, and I'm very passionate about this. But then the DT instructor gets involved in a martial art. Typically it's jiu-jitsu, right? And I love jiu-jitsu, right? I've been doing it a long time. I love it. And then they immediately are like, jiu-jitsu is the answer to all of our problems. Right. Which,
Just pull guard. Just pull guard.
Yeah. I mean, I've had this conversation with probably 500 people, and, they'll go to a DT instructor school, and they'll get influenced by somebody. And then next thing you know, they're like, hey, back when I was, running the program, they'd be like, hey, I'd like to do a whole lot more groundwork. And I'm like, can you invent a time machine and give us 40 more hours? Because it works. Because like, I can tell you, like, if you get into an unarmed confrontation with somebody that's reasonably your size, and jiu-jitsu and they don't, you're going to win.
Yeah.
That's a fact, Jack. There is a size skill level.
Sure.
Thing
Yeah.
That kind of evens itself out to a certain degree. But anyway, so that would be hey, they want to spend all this time on the ground. Well, if you've trained any jiu-jitsu, or any of your listeners have, like, your first like couple months is just like, I'm just holding my breath, hoping not to die.
Yeah.
Right?
You're drowning.
And then, you pick up blue belt, purple belt, brown, whatever you end up being. Then you're just like, hey, like, this is so easy to me because I've got now 3,000 hours on the mat. Well, time on the mat, right? Time on the mat equals typically proficiency, especially if it's done in a correct way. But anyway, so, we're teaching these people all these concepts and principles, and it's a fire hose of information. And, we had to look at what was the most important, right? And that's what we taught. And some of the stuff, like, I was always trying to take baton out. Like, that was like the big thing, right? Because, like, baton takes, like, a familiarization is like 3 or 4 hours. Well, I was like, I would rather have this 3 or 4 hours than something else. And I would, like, leave it out of the lesson plan, and, like, the boss would come in and be like, hey, dude, you're not teaching baton anymore. I was like,
When was the last time you saw someone use a baton?
well, I think there's a use for a baton.
They're scratching your back.
Yeah, scratching now. But your agencies typically like to do that too. They have their baton thing, and they have their licensure stuff. Or,
Well, even like our baton training, I used to remember, you'd have like the red man suit.
yeah,
And the guy was like walking around, and you're just like wailing on this guy in a
Yes.
red man suit for like 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, like, okay, that, like, if this was real, like, if that was an actual situation that someone recorded on their phone,
yeah, it'd be
that would be insane.
It'd be
to,
insanity,
to
yeah.
watch, and it would be on national media, and it'd be like, why can't your officers control this person who's wailing on him for 15 minutes? So it's like, training has to be realistic. Why are we doing this unless it actually carries over to the real world? Now, obviously, you can't perfectly mimic it, but
yeah.
it's
I went to a school where I went to I don't want to say the company, but I went to like one of their instructor trainer schools, and they explained it very eloquently that, they want you to have X amount of repetitions at hitting from this angle to get to the affected target area. And I don't disagree with them on that. But if you're not gonna, if you want to do 25 reps, you want to do 25 good reps. If you want to do 25 reps so you can check it off the sheet, you're going to do them quickly, right?
and that's typically what happens.
And that could be what happens. It's a thing, and people get,
Well,
distracted.
and I get, like, when we're hitting the bags, right? Like, those are the reps. I view that kind of like shooting the target with a gun. It's like, you're just getting the reps in. You're making sure that you're doing the fundamentals. But then, like, when you're doing the force on force, if we're doing force on force with Sims, and like the role players just get coming at you like a zombie, and you just shot him like 50 times, it's like, okay, guys, is this realistic training, or are we building training scars? So
we changed the DT from when you went through. When you went through, did we fight y'all at the end?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it used to be like, when I went through, it would be like they're going to show you a couple techniques, and then at the end you would go in there and they'd make you do like 50 burpees or 20 burpees, and you'd go in there and some, 40-year-old dude that's been doing martial arts his whole life just beat the crap out of you. It's like this sucks.
Good luck.
Yeah. Or they put a bag on your head and spin you around, and then they hit you, and the next thing you know, you're like, and it was just like, hey, will this person quit? I don't see the training value in that. This is something an old platoon sergeant used to tell me. He's like, we're all tough. When he was talking about like PT and the young Marines, he's like, we're all tough guys. Like, we don't need to prove it every single day. But what we got into in DT was I developed, I was like, I developed it because I was in charge of it, but everybody kind of threw in the mix, and I was even using students' ideas because I've got some great nuggets from people that are 23 that have no, like, why don't we do this? I'm like, hey, credit to it.
Yeah, still that.
Yeah, that's mine. But so we went through and we said, all right, cool, we're gonna do a version of use of force. Not use of force. How to evaluate use of force training, right? So what we do is, we teach all the stuff. We said, show me a kick. All right, cool. You know where it is. Where's the target area? They tell us where the target area is. Hey, it's comprehension of where to hit them. Why do we hit them? If we were going to use that amount of force, why and where, right? Then we talk about tactical options. So, hey, if these circumstances, if this fact pattern happens, what are your options right now? And in the beginning, they would say, I don't know. And then they're like, all right, cool. I really like, I've got these reps at, this takedown or this strike or this kick or, front thrust kick is going to stop their forward momentum and all this stuff. So, and then if they were on the ground, what's your relative position to handcuffing or whatever it is. And they would kind of walk through, which is basically a rehearsal, right? So like, I'm an old military dude. Like, so like we've developed a plan. We have a couple options, and then we rehearse it. And then after we rehearse it, we execute it. And then we would take them to the mat. There would be a role player. I wanted, and this is not you couldn't sustain this because like I'm beat up, right? Like when I say I've done 1,000 of these, I've done thousands of these because, we had 120 students 5 times a year, 4 times a year for 8 years, right? And we fought most of them, and I can tell you some funny stories about that, but so anyway, and then we would get involved. So long story short, so they're evaluated like, hey, what's their initial contact? What's their demeanor? What are they saying, right? And then what we'd like to do is the majority, right? So there's 5 categories. If they got 3 of them right, then that they pass standard majority, right? And then there's 5 sections. So if they pass 3 out of the 5, and then if they quit or say something crazy or say something like racial slur and hit them, like, yeah, clearly you're failed.
Yeah.
But what so like their initial contact, their language, their positioning, their arrest procedure, their searching procedure, and what it did is like, hey, this person got, we swung and hit this person with pads on, right? And they, created distance, went to an intermediate weapon system. That's a pretty good plan, especially if you're 145 pounds. We grabbed a hold of somebody, and these are very scripted, right? In our head, that the student had no idea what was going on. We'd basically shoot in and grab them by the waist and try to pick them up. Well, they would, do X, Y, or Z and how they dealt with that situation. And then post-event, they could give us other enforcement, use of force options. And what it does is it really showed us that they have an idea of what an appropriate amount of force is versus, punch them in the face, or, I'll just pull out my gun and kill them. Yeah, because that's a joke that they always, they used to say like, oh, what do you do if I grabbed you? Oh, I'll just pull out my gun and kill you. Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Good luck with
afterwards.
That. Yeah. Have fun with that. I mean, it's not have fun with that, but it's like you're gonna like.
It's too simplistic, reduction area. Yeah.
And then the second conversation would be like, hey, when you shoot somebody with a gun, they typically don't die.
Handguns are not good at killing people.
Yeah, they're not good at killing people. It's like cars are better at killing people, but. Anyway, so that's how we would kind of that's kind of the progression of like we took the DT program to where we were really trying to validate if they had an honest understanding of appropriate force against somebody doing something
So you would have the officers who had been going through their own DT program, and then you would evaluate them based on these like scenarios.
No, our students in the academy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like at the end of the week, instead of just like going in there and getting beat up by the instructor, we were running you through a mock scenario, and then we would there would be a physical part of it too, but it wasn't like a smoke session. It was more like these are the other 3 things or 5 things I could have done, and because all we're trying to do is give you use of force options, and to see if you can interpret the stimulus that we're giving you and give an appropriate response, because that's really all we care about, right?
Yeah.
You know, because all we really care about is like, hey, are they going to lose their mind and make somebody a unicorn? I take a baton and stick it through their head. Like that's what we don't want, right? Or we don't want the guy to be on the ground and some drunk land on him and they pull out their gun and try to body shot somebody with a Glock, like, which are all things that have been done, right? Or pistol whip somebody. Things have been done. So, you know, so it really gave us a real opportunity to evaluate that student. And some of the agencies, a lot of the agencies around here, not even here, but I've been contacted. And I do consult work too, you know, consultant work too. But they're really looking at, hey, this is probably a better for us, right? Liability wise, right? Because, you know, just showing somebody, hey, do 100 punches and then they go out there and punch somebody in the face. Well, you know.
Well, it's like the bill drill. If all you ever teach your officers to do is, you know, bill drill, just drilling the target, you know, X number of times. Every time you shoot, you're going to shoot the target 7 times. Well, what do you think is going to happen when they go and shoot someone?
Yeah, for
They're just
sure.
going to drop 7 rounds into them, and they're not going to be responding to, I like what you said about stimulus, because ultimately that's what you are responding to is a stimulus.
Yeah.
And like even at the range where all we do is targets or threat or beep, and it's like that's not the stimulus that you're going to get in a real fight. And so I think that's very smart to go towards let's see how they respond to the real stimulus and evaluate whether or not that was the appropriate response
and realistic response, right? So like one of our scenarios, so like you know, we had it on like a thing, and I'd play, you know, music, you know, if you remember, I always play like not like Taylor Swift, and just because I'm silly, right? And I also like Taylor Swift, but my kids are obsessed, right? But I would play loud music usually, or Russian rap music, just something obnoxious, and every second, you know, it went on a scale, but like if they came in and they were confident, squared away, said the right things, hey, sometimes there was no fight. Right, which was built into the training program. And I'm not going to sit here and explain the whole training program unless you want me to, but you know, it was built in for them to win and to if they said the right things and they acted the right way. Because like I always thought like, hey man, like I came in there and I did what I was supposed to do, and then you punched me in the face. Like in the training scenario, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
it's negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Or
So
punishing them for doing the right thing
because you want them to get hit, right? And I understand that whole wanting to, you know, you want your student to get hit. I know that sounds crazy to non-cops, but like we want you to get hit in the face and to deal with it, right? Not just the face, but we want you to be able to deal with trauma.
that's why you get pepper sprayed.
Yeah, that's also fun, but for them, for me, right? But you know, so if they did the right thing, they can walk out of there without, you know, having some kind of, you know, whatever. And then we would do a box drill. So we would say, hey, you know, we had to, you know, I wrote all this out, right? It's like, hey, you did great. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Blah, 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 blah. They went into custody. Say that I did a good job. You know, I did a good job. Perfect. Now we're doing a box drill. This has nothing to do with what we just did. We put the thing on and spin you around, and we're going to simulate you get sucker punched while responding to a call. And we'd hit them. You know, not really, but they had the helmet on the mouthpiece. They go down to the ground. You know, most of us are at least blue, purple belt jiu-jitsu guys, big guys, wrestled, and we would just get on top of them, and they would have to work their way into some, you know, facsimile of right. And, you know, what we were trying to judge was like, because one of the things that was kind of the big themes was like, we are taking people to jail, not fighting people, right? Because like, you know, you'd see sometimes the officers, especially if they've trained, they'd come up, or they would like get out of it and then like pass guard and like try to mount, and then, you know, which is something else that has to be addressed, but you have to talk about. Well, I feel it's appropriate to talk about in DT is like if you're a jiu-jitsu guy or a wrestler or something like that, like this is the rules of jiu-jitsu are enforced in a jiu-jitsu gym. Period.
It's a sport.
It's a sport, and it's fun, and it's awesome, and it works great. If you introduce anything else, jiu-jitsu is different, right? And you know, and I've been doing this for a long time, and you know, and I can remember a very old Brazilian dude. I went to a seminar, and I was like, I wanted to roll with him, and he was like, and he's like, you're 200, you know, he's like, I'm 150, 155 pounds, and I'm, at the time I think it was like 55, and when we were always trying to say, hey, how does this apply to law enforcement? And the younger, I think the younger Gracie guys, I mean, they got really good products, and Gracie combatives, it's good. It's hard. It's hard, it's hard for the masses, right? But I think it's very, very good. But, they would all, because these guys were traditional jiu-jitsu guys, and they would just be like, it doesn't, it'll help you to get up, it'll help you to, whatever. But like when you start getting punched in the face or a knife is involved, or a gun is involved, then, you got to change those CTPs. And that's where, anyway, so long story short, to kind of close the loop is, defensive tactics was fun. It was hard. It's hard to keep people engaged in that, in that realm, because it's not, firearms is fun because you get to shoot stuff. DT is having to talk to somebody, having to judge your distance, having to judge use of force options when, using force is reactive, really, right? Because, we're taught like, hey, if they do this, then, this is appropriate. If they do X, then, but you can't pull out your pepper spray when you see somebody that just is acting funny and point it at them, so, and, and a lot of time we as law enforcement, I say we, like I'm saying, like I have the answer to all the problems. I don't, but we can policy ourselves into a very weird corner, and saying, we're scared of being sued. Hey, you're going to get sued. Don't do stupid stuff. And you don't, don't do stupid stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of.
Yeah. I want to talk more about that. So yeah, let's talk about the policy side of that. Like,
sure.
What are your thoughts on that, and like how departments can balance, because obviously they have to have policies, right? But
sure,
you can also, like you said, paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah.
How do you balance that, or how have you seen in your experience the best way to go about balancing that?
Well, I mean, the agency can do whatever they want, for the most part. But when they ask me a recommendation, or they used to ask me a recommendation, I don't do that anymore, right? If you think about a scenario where you could win and do the right thing, especially use of force option wise, but it also breaks your policy, maybe you got a bad policy, So like we had agencies that were like, hey, we want you to say some kind of command before you display electronic device, think taser. That makes sense to a person that's not a cop, right? Because you could say like, hey, like I want to be able to verbally warn them, right? And then, but what, if you get kind of the weeds of it is, sometimes pulling that taser out and put it next to your leg is that's showing force, right? You showing up in a uniform, you showing up in a cop car. Hey, that's force. You saying, hey, sir, come here. Or, hey, sir, you're giving a lawful command. I mean, all these things are force that, agencies sometimes only start with force when there's a potential for injury. And that's not, in my opinion, that's kind of where we kind of overlook it at, right? So you showing up to a call in a uniform, you're showing force. You say something, you're showing force. You having that on your belt, that's a show of force. Like one of the things that happens one of the things that happens when you're dealing with large groups of people is the crowd reacts collectively to what the law enforcement's doing in some capacity, right? Where if the crowd's getting rowdy and the bus shows up with the SWAT team or the riot team guys, there's a change in the crowd, or there could be. The crowd keeps getting rowdy or disorderly. They're doing something lawful, but it's going on the edge of to where they're either going to hurt somebody or throwing things. That would be an example. Then the guys get off the bus with their riot gear. Okay, that's show force. They put on their riot gear. They're showing force, right?
Yeah.
So like if you understand it in those terms, I think agencies wouldn't have the inclination to write policy that gives a script to using force, or gives See, my recommendation has always been, hey, use the amount of force necessary to effect an arrest. Period. Sign it. That's your, what I mean? And then here's my guidance on the issued equipment that we give you. Right? And then that guidance can be whatever, but guidance is not policy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's good. So, you know, and I don't want to say the smaller or the less policy, the better.
But sometimes.
But sometimes that's an appropriate action.
Because the world is so dynamic and
fluid.
complex. It's difficult to write a policy that's going to perfectly fit this thing.
Just write a policy say don't do stupid stuff. Don't hurt people, right? You know, don't hurt people unless they need hurting. Because sometimes people, you know, and that's the weird part about force is that, you know, it's a mechanism that the society gives us so that they can live their lives, right? Mm-hmm. People can farm and people can be dentists, and then they're going to pay somebody taxes to defend them when they need defending. And, you know,
that's why I say that everyone is pro-gun. They just don't realize it. Some people just don't choose to have a gun. They just would rather outsource that to someone else.
And that's but that's, you know, it's a societal thing, right? Mm-hmm. You know, hey, we're gonna pay, you know, we're gonna pay the savages. You know, they're gonna get haircuts and get some training, and you know, we're gonna pay the people that want to do that, you know, an amount of money so that, you know, when the wolf knocks on the door, I don't want to be like a no fear T-shirt or like some like weird, you know, podcast person that's given like, you know, David Goggins type stuff, but you know, but there needs to be somebody ready to rock and roll when something, you know, when that worst day happens, and that's a reality. It could be a way. It's like a weird flex for some people, right? To say, hey, I've got the answer to all of these things, especially in like a city, you know, where there's like people that are making policy that have absolutely no interest or, you know, reasonably know anything about law enforcement, and then the, you know, your chief or your sheriff or whomever, your, you know, special agent in charge, they have to, you know, make it right with these people. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but like they have to, you know, if you hire you know, like in state government, there is you know, an appointed person by the governor's office that, you know, is the decision maker for those agencies, you know, like say highway patrol or whatever it is, you know, safety. Luckily they put good people in the spots, but you know, in the instance that somebody along the way either is ill-informed or has a, you know, some kind of agenda, then, you know, that could really affect the policies, i.e. the ability for the officers to do what they need. And, you know, and I think something that should be said when we're talking about, like, you know, especially like throwing darts at people, which I don't think we're throwing them at anybody, is that law enforcement is the best it's ever been. Like, you know, and that's, you know, people, when I tell them what I've done for the majority of my life, you know, they say, oh, it'd be a terrible time to be a cop. I'm like, wrong. Best time in the world to be a cop. Hey, we've got, you know, inventions that have changed law enforcement. I mean, if you really think about it, you know, 100 years ago, what were cops doing? You know, 200 years, you know what I'm saying? Not when I say 200 years ago, I mean, people that defended, you know, because, you know, it started off in a much different way than, you know, hey, I'll do it, and here's $50,000 a year, $100,000 a year to do it. But, you know, we have the ability to say, you know, get past the enforcement piece. You know, technology is advanced where we can, you know, save people's lives like roadside. You know, we can, you know, if you think about it, there's probably enough firepower in most of these agencies' cars to assault a village. You know, and you know, that's a cool thing. And I like to, anytime I say something, you know, that kind of throws a shot at administrators, you know, I also want to say like, hey, things are pretty good to a certain degree.
Yeah, you talked about liability and how, you know, being overly concerned with liability. I've noticed that too, where it seems like they're just so concerned with getting sued, or every single time they get sued, the city just folds, or cities will just fold and bend over it, and it seems like it creates a positive reinforcement to other people who may want to sue. And
yeah, so we'll do an experiment, right? So when COVID happened, right? I mean, how many people did you see driving down the road in a car by themselves with a mask on?
Several.
You know what I'm saying? I went to Walmart one time and I saw a dude with a bag on his head, and I was like, man, it's going downhill, boys. You know?
Keep that bag on long enough, you won't get COVID.
That's what I said. I said tape around the neck now. People react to things, and you know, and I'm in the Army. You know, I'm in the National Guard, and I'm an officer, which is odd, right? And I hear, you know, I'm getting on the end now of, we need a solution to this problem, not, hey, there's a problem, who do we call, right? So it's very easy to say like, hey, you know, somebody crashed a car that a officer crashed a car at night. Well, No more driving cars at night. That's just a stupid example, but because that middle level administrator, whomever, feels probably obligated to tell their boss or version of their boss, here's a solution to a problem that we have. And that's one of the lessons that I've always at least tried to tell myself, is that not everything's a lesson. Mm-hmm. I mean,
sometimes stuff just happens.
Sometimes stuff happens, you know what I mean? And, there are problems that we don't have solutions for, but on the policy side of the house, a check is going to get written, and a lot of the times these use of force cases, and I'm an expert witness in federal court, and I've been involved in quite a few of not injuries, but use of force incidents where I've had to interpret something or give an explanation of events, and those are kind of ugly sometimes, because sometimes it looks really bad, but when you break it down, you're like, hey, this is appropriate. Mm-hmm. It just looks bad.
Yeah.
And you can break down. One that I'm thinking about in general is we broke it down frame by frame, and we were like, look, like when, I don't want to get into specifics of the case because I think, I don't know if it's out of all of that yet, but it looked like that. Like it was like one of those videos, like you looked at it first and you're like, uh-oh. Mm-hmm. And then when you broke it down and you saw the variables, you're like, okay, well, I'm really glad this is not me. I mean, I was like, I'm glad I'm not on either end of this.
Yeah.
But the officer, in my opinion, did act in a reasonable manner, and knowing what the standard is, right? But
I like what you said about there are some things that happen that there just aren't solutions to.
That's correct.
One time, I remember during roll call one morning, they were talking about something that happened the night before. Someone, their LPR, license plate reader, picked up a car going in the other direction.
That's kind of cool.
And the officer turned around just to initiate a traffic stop. Sure. And in the process of doing that, no pursuit had been initiated yet. Mm-hmm. The person took off and flipped. Didn't hurt anyone else, hurt themselves, whatever. Got the car because obviously it flipped. Next day in roll call, their solution was, don't turn around on any cars if you notice they're stolen. And I swear I thought that I was like, there's no way I heard this right. I had to have misheard what they said. And I went up to one of the sergeants afterwards and I said, I just want to make sure I understand, you guys don't want us to turn around on stolen cars. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just, worried about, the possibility of them running liability. And I was just like, okay, all right. If the citizens of this city knew that this is what you were telling their officers to do, I think they would be up in arms.
So the experiment that we were talking about earlier is that you put yourself in the position of different people, and when I put myself in the position, and that's something I would tell especially when I was teaching, I would tell the students, I was like, when we're talking about use of force options, what's the scare, put yourself as a suspect, close your eyes. When we do this particular disarming technique, I'm going to close your eyes and, take all the cop stuff about you and throw it away and think about yourself and being in a desperate situation. And now you have substance abuse dependence. Mm-hmm. Now you're down to your last $50. You've got a kid. You've got all of these things. You got a pressure and you need X, Y, or Z. And you put yourself in a situation where, hey, I'm going to go make this very poor decision, and I don't think it's very rarely do we run into somebody robbing somebody because they're trying to put food in their kid's mouth, right? It's clearly, unfortunately, it's because I'm broke, because I saw I want some new shoes or something, right? Mm-hmm. But, you put yourself in this very bad situation, and then you have to make a calculated decision to do something wrong for something good, right? And if you think about that long enough, you'll realize, at least I realized that, hey, it's in me, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to act like I'm fighting being a criminal, but, I get it, right? A different world, different way. Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm coming in contact with a law enforcement officer, right? And, the thought experiment, I don't know if I ever did this when you were in the academy, but I would make them lay on the ground. Not make them, I'd tell them by force, or we're going to the hill, right?
Yeah.
But I want them to kind of put themselves in the shoes of somebody that has committed a crime. Now, think about being intoxicated driving, right? What would you do to get out of that, right? Not, some weird sexual stuff. More like, You try to act cool. You try to act calm. You got gum in your mouth. And now, as a cop, you're like, you walk up to a car, it's 11:30 at night. Guy's he's smoking cigarettes with gum. He's like, dude, So you're kind of running yourself through that scenario. Now you kind of up it a little bit. Now I'm gonna commit a robbery. All right, I've got all the robbery tools, the burglary tools to burgle, right? And then I got my mask and my gloves and my flashlight, and I get stopped by a police officer. Does that make sense? And so now you're thinking like, hey, they don't really know what I'm doing yet, but if they see this, they're going to, realize like, hey, I'm about to do X, Y, or Z. Now put yourself post-event. You've committed this robbery. Nobody got hurt. You sold a bunch of stuff. You get stopped by a police officer. The first thing in your head that you think about is they know, right? Because the regular person, I've been a cop for 20-something years, right? And a patrol car pulls behind me. I'm like, oh my gosh, they know my license is expired.
Yeah.
It's not, so you have all that to lose. And when you start thinking about that, you can gauge at a very elementary level, in my opinion, their options, which help you create your options. So, you fast forward, but you push it to the limit to where, every murder happened somewhere. And if that body is not found at the murder scene, it got transported somewhere, right? Hopefully you can't relate to this. Every line of cocaine that somebody does came from a kilo, that came from a shipment, that came from a cartel. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. So to say that stuff doesn't move A to B is insanity. I mean, I lived in a town that most people's never heard of, and I've got, hundreds of drug seizures that you would be like, what? And if you found yourself in a situation where you're behind the wheel of a car, or you're at a house that's got a substance or something or a dead body that's going to put you in the jail forever, what would you do?
Most people would fight.
Well, that's initial. I want to fight. But if you really want to think about it, if you really get to the nuts and bolts, you know what I'm saying? And I used to teach this in the undercover school that me and another guy kind of would put on. This agent that was telling me about, Wayne, is, if they find out that you're an undercover operator or if you're an informant, the longer that person thinks about it, there's only really one option, right? Think about it, right? If I was an informant and I was, and you're selling illegal guns in here or something, some version of that. And you're like, hey, everything I know is going to be gone. And you at some point realize that I am that person. The second I walk out of this house, you're gone. I mean, let's say you're not gone, but your options are gone, right? So, on that traffic stop, on that, in that contact with somebody, if the worst thing has happened and they tried to hurt you, does that make sense to you? Then, if you can do the thought experiment to where the worst thing in the world is happening to you and you now have contact with law enforcement, what are your tactical options? One is give up. The other is what? You're going to have to attack, kill, whatever that officer. Because once they find out, then, and that radio hits, the world knows and it's over, so that was a thought, this is like a 30-minute thought experiment, right? Or not really, but it's more of like a sit down and try to think about what you would do if you were put in that situation, even if it was your own fault. And I always looked at my tactical options as a little different. That's what made me wear a secondary weapon on the other side. That's because and this all started in interdiction for me, because I was like, hey, if I stop the guy with all the drugs, what are the odds of him making sure that there's just a dead body on the side of the road and that car leaves, right? Set your car on fire or whatever. That was always in my head, right? So does that even make sense?
Yeah, because that person has, they at that point, they're at the end of the rope. And
at the end of the rope, man. The desperate people do desperate
drowning
stuff.
At that point.
They're drowning. And really, did you ever read that book, Bravo 20? Man, it's like British dudes, and it's like during the Gulf War, and, they always... every one of these stories that, if you've ever read them, what's the one with the Marcus Luttrell guy?
Lone Survivor.
Lone Survivor. Yeah. So that's an old story. Probably goes back to, not that goes back, but there's probably versions of this throughout history. You're somewhere you're not supposed to be, right? And this is kind of relates to this. You're somewhere you're not supposed to be. you're doing snooping, pooping, whatever, and then a young farm kid sees you, and he's going to go back and report that he saw, well, the answer is what? What's the real answer?
Most people would say kill him.
Absolutely. Right. And that, I mean, what I'm getting at is that same scenario exists in law enforcement
For that person.
who's at the end of the rope. And that's what was always scary with us when we were doing like on SWAT or whatever, when we were doing tactical entries. I was like, hey guys, like this guy's at the end of the rope. I mean, the odds of you pulling up to a scene to a domestic and the guy coming out guns blazing is pretty low, realistically. But you've cornered a guy in a house that's wanted for 10 murder or a murder. Now that percentages change, you know what I mean? So, it's scary. And that's how, that's one role or one exercise that I always thought was super significant that some people, a lot of times the students would just fall asleep. Which I always thought was funny because I was like,
Yeah.
because now I'm going to smoke you to death. But anyway, it was a long discussion around a trip that I always thought was pretty cool.
No, it does make sense, and I think it's an important thought experiment to put yourself in those people's situation because, one, it's important to have like some level of empathy, not sympathy, but empathy, and be able to relate, and because it helps you predict what someone may do,
What they could do, yeah,
or what they could do, yeah.
Yeah, there are options,
But it's because it's easy just to like, for the officer, with the number of stops they do or domestics they go to or whatever, it's just another number. It's just another one. It's just another call. But to think about like that person, that may be the scariest thing, and the thing where they're like at their breaking point, and understanding that if they're there and they're at that breaking point, you may be between them and what they think is freedom.
Yeah, and that was a more elegant way to explain that. yeah, great job. Yeah, edit all the other. No, it was.
I'm just making sure I understood what you were saying.
Yeah, getting between a mill, the bear and the mill sometimes, it can be a difficult situation. But in regards to defensive tactics, I just wanted. I wanted the students to understand. Just wanted the students to have a game plan and like their version of success. And sometimes that success is to walk away or run away, right? Because there's no obligation to stay there and get the crap beat out of you, and there's definitely no obligation to die over a traffic stop. But the defensive tactics thing was fun. I luckily had the opportunity to hire the people that replaced me, and they're really good. Maybe not so much in the haircut department. But they're good folks, and and the program is changing. It's evolving. Even after I left, because I left and went to a state agency in like in an investigative role, and then currently doing active duty Army stuff or active duty Guard stuff. Which the Guard thing is fun and is awesome.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that. But
so given all the years you've had training law enforcement in law enforcement, what would you say are the biggest challenges that law enforcement agencies face? Maybe, and take that however you want it.
Okay. So this is not going to be popular, but you got the wrong guy in training, right? So if you go around, and I'm not talking about just Tennessee, but there are agencies out there that have the absolute best person that they can do to be in charge of that training program or training in general. But typically what happens is that, it's that Peter principle, right? You get promoted to to where you're maybe not as the most effective person for that position. And training can be where that person lands. So you've got somebody that wants to be the instructor of everything, right? So I'm a big believer in, let's learn one thing really, really well and be proficient in, the things for yourself, and then, we'll have like a firearms people and we'll have like DT people. And, a thing in the military that I was told one time is that, I'm a military officer now, so which is odd again, but you want to be, a mile wide and we want you to be a mile wide and an inch deep, so that, a little bit about a lot of stuff, but you're more of, X, Y, Z.
You also know who to go to, who knows.
But in
the
the
depth.
training world, you should be maybe an inch wide and a mile deep. So, like, hey, I know this really, 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 really well, and I'm not gonna comment on. So, like, when I was in like when you went through the academy, you never probably heard me say much about firearms, right? Because number one, I don't particularly care for guns. I have guns. I can shoot guns. I've been in the infantry, majority of my life, but.
Yeah.
But like sitting around teaching somebody how to shoot is just a scratch I never had, right? It just doesn't make sense to me, right? I mean, obviously, you should be able to shoot, but the majority of the shootings I've ever been in have been with a handgun. At least have always been within, punching distance. Yeah, so
Closer than this, probably.
Yeah. So anyway, but there's usually one person at these agencies that kind of holds all the marbles, and that person don't typically want to give up the marbles, or when they do, they want to, like it's a reward thing or something, or not, and I'm not just throwing darts at people. There's small agencies out there that are the best. There's phenomenal cops out there, right? And if you're in a small agency where you're, there's, I think at one point, I want to say like 2012 or 13, like the average police department in Tennessee was like 7 to 12 people, right? So the majority of the people are in small agencies, right?
Wow.
Unless you're in like a Nashville, Murfreesboro, Clarksville, Jackson, you're gonna know everybody at the PD, right? In theory. So these guys and gals, they have to, they have to know a bunch of things. They can't, one of the things that I always found was interesting was we'd get officers from like LAPD and New York, and we'd be like, ooh, they probably know a bunch of stuff we don't know. Wrong, right? Hey, yeah, they're like, oh, I worked in the traffic division for 16 years. Like, oh, so you don't know how to do anything?
Yeah,
cool guy, but yeah, So, and again, that's not always the case. There's phenomenal people from other places, but the fancier the agency, we would, when you get to actually know them, you're like, oh no, because the guy or gal that works at, what's the smallest agency around here? Deckard, Winchester, I'm saying, hey, those guys have worked rapes, murders, traffic stops, domestics.
They're generalists.
There are generalists that could, and some of those guys look like specialists in all, right? So that's always the issue that I had, is that the agencies at the small level, they want to do in-house training because of budget reasons, but that person wants to teach it all, and you don't have to be a master jiu-jitsu guy to teach really good jiu-jitsu, but it helps, right? So we would get people that were instructors that would come to my instructor schools, and I would say, hey, they would be like, hey, what do you think about firearms? And I would say, I don't know. Go to the range and ask them. This is all I know, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not all I know, but this is all I'm going to comment on.
Yeah.
Right. And they would say, well, I'm going to send this guy to firearms school, driving school, DT instructor school, and then he's going to be our training guy. And I'm like, hey, you should probably rethink that, right? Because
that's a lot for one person.
That's a lot for one person, especially if they're young, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, should you be certified in multiple things so that you can kind of, cross-pollinate your training program, right? Because I think training should go in cycles, right? So in a defensive tactics program at an agency, initial training, and then, set it up like most martial arts schools, jiu-jitsu, karate, whatever, is, they're going to be like, hey, first quarter, we're going to really deal with, let's say handcuffing techniques. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we're going to transition into ground defense from X, Y, or Z. And so that there is a training plan that's constantly kind of overlapping with each other, so that, so it's not just you go in, hold your breath for 8 hours during DT or 12 hours or however long you're going to do it, and then, dread next year's training event. It should be something that kind of.
How many departments do what you just said, though?
Several. Okay. And I helped out with a few. And what I mean by that is that, that there are agencies out there that have phenomenal training officers that say, hey, I do not understand this at all. Will you please come in? Can you give me a day to come in and talk? Absolutely. Let's go. You know what I'm saying? Or can you set up my training events? I.e., if we were going to do a defensive tactics, force on force drill, and this is the thing that, everybody wants to get up there and talk and have the instructor shirt on and say, I'm the guy, and it's very weird because there's dudes in this that are not in law enforcement or military at all. and that and I'm not going to on these guys, right? Because I think, you know, wanting to be able to defend yourself and even train others, there's something cool about that, because you're trying to help your community. Hopefully that's what your motivation is, and it's not some kind of like God weird. You're trying to play like special forces guy, and, and there's hundreds of those guys running around, but it's the motivation is what my concern is. Correction, that's what my interest is. I'm not motivated at all. I don't know about that specifically, but there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I was asking about the, you mentioned like having an annual cycle, and we had some great DT instructors.
Yeah.
But the actual training cycle was poor, because we would do phenomenal DT training in the beginning, and we would have during the
like in service or something.
Not the in service, but our department's like
In-house
mini academy before. I'm not gonna use his name, but that academy,
yeah.
and then every year we would do, maybe during COVID they didn't, but do the 8 hours of DT during in service. But there wasn't the natural like, hey, in the first quarter we're gonna work on handcuffing techniques, but there are departments that do that and have that built into their.
Yeah, there are, but and again, I don't know everybody's training schedule. I know that I would send somebody. Usually, they would send them to a defensive tactics instructor school, like one maybe that I was teaching or involved in, and we would have a conversation about training. And they would all, when they would ask, hey, what do you think about this? And for context, I was the lead defensive tactics instructor for the state, and it was all I was doing. So it was like my 100% focus. And I would say, hey, I'll help you out, and I would write them, hey, let's do this. And, make sure that your agency's down for it, but do a force on force or a version of that, because you can scale it back, right? So when you're 50, like I'm in my mid 40s, right? Like I'm not the 28-year-old dude that I was, when I, or 25-year-old or whatever. So, it's not, it's real easy for a 30-year-old instructor DT wise to go in there and say, all right, everybody, we're going to do ground stuff. Well, hey, guess what? My hips hurt every day, bro. Like, hey, guess what? I'm 55 years old and I'm trying not to get the knee replacement. So, the argument of, hey, if they can't train to the standard, they should go home. Well, that's not reasonable in long. So like in the military, like
they're already hurting for numbers.
Yeah. And it's not about numbers, but you should have, there's something, the conversation about an officer that is, 50 years old, 55 years old, that's, put on some weight, has some health issues. Like, let's not negate that dude or that lady has a closet full of experience that they should be, that we should be utilizing. I mean, some of the agencies that are around here, I can remember being a young guy and running into a 55-year-old master patrol officer and initially thinking, what a piece of shit, this guy's a turd. And then being on a call and being like, oh gosh, humble pie, he just solved this problem and he explained to me why. And, their experience, long story short, we shouldn't just say, hey, you should be able to, you should have to fight a 30-year-old DT instructor for in-service, because they're not going to do it, or they're going to get hurt, and you're going to have, those issues that are big concerns of agencies, and they're very reasonable. A lot of agencies have went to this or tried to have looked at going to like a PT test or some version of that, and my question is like, what happens when they fail it? Are you going to fire them? Because like in the Army, if you can't pass a PT test, you're gone, right? Eventually, right? It's pretty easy to pass a PT test right now, but the training cycle should reflect the type of work that you're doing, in my opinion. So, like we did, I did an in-service for a very large agency, and they basically they went to my DT course, and the guy that they put over it, extremely humble, good dude, and he just said, hey, I just don't understand this like y'all do, because this is what y'all do every day. Will you give me some time to come in and kind of talk the piece, and then show us a couple things, and then maybe set up a use of force stuff. Too easy, right? We went there, and we did it. So their patrol division got a version of it. Their detective division got why? Why are we not teaching the same thing? Because patrol officer's job is different.
Yeah, detectives are much less likely to be in a DT incident than.
But I think if the detective is involved in a DT incident, it's very likely to be more tougher, right? If you're a homicide detective, you should be arresting what? murderers.
Yeah.
So if you're a narcotics detective, you're dealing with drug dealers.
Yeah.
And the drug dealers aren't arming themselves typically to fight us, right? They're, you know what I mean? So a lot of times when we hit these, back when we'd hit these houses and stuff, and we'd have drugs, guns and money, those guns weren't for us. They were for somebody trying to rob them, which, and that's another conversation. But anyway, but yeah, so your training could and maybe should reflect what type of work you're doing. Some of the stuff that we got into in the end, especially with the officers that have, post academy, one agency example, they're plain clothes. So, hey, how to manipulate your handcuffs while wearing a dress. Obviously I didn't wear a dress, but
Equal opportunity.
hey, whatever. But these agents, are wearing suit pants or power pants, or
yeah.
you know what I'm saying. So we did some training with that, and then 2-on-1 drills. We call it contact and cover, right? Hey, how are we going to communicate with each other? Of how because you've probably been in a dog pile. I hope not, but I'm say you've been in one before where guy runs, something happens. You got one guy on his leg, one guy on his other leg. Two people are laying on him. The sergeant's in the back going, "Stop resisting," because that's what we're supposed to say.
Yeah.
And really, there's no because the guy on, at top is saying, "Show me your hands," and the guy on bottom is saying, "Quit moving." And so,
fighting the other officers half the time.
you're contradicting each other. And I've been guilty of it myself, I'm sure. But we're involved in that in our we involved that in our training program so that one person could take control. With this agency that I was referring to, we really drilled how to hold somebody not in a submission, but hold somebody in a restrained position while the other person goes and gets the handcuffs, because that was the problem they were having constantly, is that they typically didn't carry handcuffs on them because you start off right. Well, so hear me out here, right? Are you in a plainclothes unit at all? Mm-mm. Okay. Well, here's the secrets, right? Unfortunate. Excuse me. Is you wear a gun. Like I can remember doing surveillance on, you wear a gun, you wear extra magazines, you wear a handcuff, you wear a flashlight, and you try to do it in a clandestine environment. In the summertime,
Doesn't really work.
it doesn't work very well. And then you're sitting in a car doing surveillance for 8 hours, and you're like, I'm just going to take this gun off. And then it turns into, hey, I'm just going to leave it in the console. And then, hey, I'm telling you, it would blow your mind. Like, I remember we hit a house one night, and the backup, the circumstances of it were a little odd because it was like, hey, we got to go right now. And, I was a SWAT guy at the time too. So, put on plates, and I'm like looking at everybody. I was like, hey, get your gear on. They're like, we're good. I'm like, one guy's got a phone with a light on it. and it's because, these guys, they just didn't carry their stuff with them. And it was just like, all right, we're going to have to call somebody else,
Wow.
But again, these dudes have been sitting in the car for 6 hours, guns digging into them. I'm not saying, hey,
Yeah, that makes sense though. In plain, I thought you meant in uniform they didn't have
no,
handcuffs.
no.
Okay.
No,
okay.
if you didn't have handcuffs in uniform, man,
That's odd.
probably need to go back to the house. But yeah, so those are the things that happen, or like nobody has a handcuff key. That was something that happened a lot. It was enough to where when I was in narcotics, like I went to that local place over by the academy. Greens Military.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the guy that owns the place, he's a super, super nice guy. He just gave me, I was like, hey, how much are handcuff keys? And he's just like, gave me a whole bag of them. I just kept them in the car. I was like, I think I still got them in my garage, because, we were constantly not having handcuff keys, which was kind of an inside joke and kind of funny. but yeah. But did I answer your question? I think? Yeah. To an extent.
Something else you mentioned earlier, talking about like use of force.
Sure.
I've noticed a lot of departments are changing their policies from force that is reasonable to force that is necessary. And can you discuss? I've heard
they're
different
using
opinions.
language from Graham v. Connor, probably, right? So,
Okay.
so when you look at it, when you look at force, right? This is my opinion, right? I'm not speaking for an agency. I'm talking, maybe even as an expert witness, right? When you look at force, several different ideas of how it's judged, right? But or not judged, but how it should be determined. But, the officer at the time of the incident interprets something. And whatever that person's response is, the officer's response is based off of, what they see, what they perceive, what their training is, and then what a reasonable person, a reasonable officer in that situation do something similar. or the same thing? And if the answer is yes to that, then you're good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
And that
So-
always made sense. But when they change it to necessary, that's where
That's I don't know specifically about that. That sounds like somebody just thinks it sounds better. And when you look at the language and even in laws, like you'd be surprised that like the amount of thought that you've put into it and the amount of thought that they've put into it is not the same sometimes. And I'm not saying they're negligent. I'm just saying that, you know, reasonable and necessary, they probably aren't cops. They're probably staff attorneys that are, you know.
Well, it seems like using the word necessary opens the door for judging in hindsight, right? So if you show up to a call and someone has a fake gun and they point it at you and it's at night and you reasonably think it's a gun and you shoot them, you're good. Reasonable standard.
Yeah.
But then a necessary standard seems to open up the door to, well, it actually wasn't necessary to shoot them because they didn't have a gun.
Well, the language is pretty clear, and I don't have it verbatim here, but you know, but the courts aren't going to look at it, you know, because hindsight's not 20/20. So looking back, what it actually is, but what it looks like, and what they can interpret it. So it's really easy for me to understand. For a young officer to understand what the reasonableness is, right?
Right.
You know, if the old idea was if you have to think about pulling the trigger, you probably shouldn't, right? You know, because that's, you know, kind of like, should I or not? Probably not, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I mean, like, hey, you know, but I can tell you from being involved in several of these, like, it's not, hey, should I? It's like, I'm about to get killed. Or, you know, and that's where society gives us this little piece of third party, right? So we can protect ourselves. Everybody can do that, but you know, we're also protect third parties and in some cases property. But the necessary thing, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't think it's wrong. I just think
It seems unnecessary.
It seems
to
a little
even change that, like, because
and I don't know
how
where
can
it's
you
changed
not?
that.
How can you not judge someone by just say it's just a reasonable standard?
So and I can get into specifics, but like this is the thing that kind of was shocking for me when I started testifying in some of the federal courts. It's what they're looking for, right? So like you can sue a ham sandwich, okay? You know, I'm not talking about like some terrible attorney suing somebody trying to get 33% of some settlement that they know they're going to settle because it's cheaper to settle than to take it to court. Like, you know, and those people are scumbags. No offense. If you're offended, then probably change your life.
Yeah.
But what the courts are looking at is like, hey, what happened, right? And I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but I had one case, and it was a very long case, and we were talking to these U.S. attorneys, and it wouldn't say we as cops, especially as administrators, they think, all right, I went to this course and I've got this license from this company and now I'm certified. Hey, that don't mean nothing, right? The courts don't care at all. Like, hey, oh, this course number, hey, and they'll stop you. Whoa, stop. Yeah, that's cool. Hey, this person did this, right? They kicked this guy, punched this guy, used this amount of force. Is it, what did it do? What was the intent? Does that make sense? Right. So like the license and the certifications and stuff, like it's irrelevant. They are under the impression that we know how to fight. They are under the impression that we know how to defend ourselves and third parties.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in that when you're testifying as an expert witness, you actually cannot say whether or not what the person did was reasonable because that's for the jury to decide. Right?
So
you're more there to explain technical nuance that the juries may not understand.
Yeah, correct. I mean, usually it's like, hey, if a person, took their foot and they kicked somebody in the leg, is that something that they were taught, and especially if I taught them or I was involved in their training or I signed off on their training program, I could look at their stuff and say, hey, these techniques were taught on this date. This is a roll call of where they're at. The technique that they're talking about, not because the person that taught them the technique probably could come in and tell them the right answer, but I'll explain this is the purpose of it. It's, to induce this. And, if somebody was doing something that looked like this, because a lot of times I won't know what the question is until they ask me. and I don't want to know the circumstances of the case. So I've done cases before where I have absolutely no idea what happened. Right now, I've got a good idea because they've asked me like questions, like explain, whatever, But with the courts, their big thing is what were they taught, not necessarily when or what, but what they did, and are these techniques, if they're even close to the same techniques that that are taught, reasonable for this amount of resistance or force from the, because we say bad guys do resistance, good guys use force, but really it's force on force. Both have force. So, and in interpreting that, we obviously can't get in their mind and see what their intent was, but we can say like, hey, and a lot of times it's, did this officer punch this person in the face, and was it done? Is that an appropriate use of force? And typically we say what? If you punch somebody in the face.
If you punch somebody in the face?
Yeah. We typically say no. Right. But is there a world that exists where you can punch somebody in the face in law enforcement? Sure.
I would think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, pretty limited, right? Because you wouldn't want to, you were never taught to curl your fist up and punch somebody in the face, because you got like, little bones in this little hand, and now you're hitting especially my big old head, a giant bone with a little bit of skin on it, and a receding hairline. I don't like to bring it up, but there's a world that exists, right? If somebody's, if somebody's trying to, hey, for example, somebody's trying to take your gun, like your gun's in the holster, you're fighting for it, and you feel like if you strike them in the face, that they'll let go of that gun. Okay. Sounds great. Right. And I think we, as not necessarily administrators, but as especially senior cops, we go, not senior cops, but some of the administrators forget that the courts are just looking at, in the grand scheme of things, did they do the right thing or the wrong thing? Not, well, they broke our policy, so we're now going to have to pay a settlement. Well, that's not really true. You know what I mean? You could pay a settlement if you, again, you could sue a ham sandwich. I mean, so, I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. So, can you maybe give some examples of situations? I mean, obviously not ones that are still ongoing, but
Sure.
talk about some cases that maybe where, the officer did something and like how that works in like an expert witness capacity.
Yeah. So, a lot of times there's an incident that occurs, and, depending on what court they get, if it's a criminal case, usually I would do criminal cases, right? And I've done some civil stuff too, but, you get a person. Here's an example of one that I didn't do, but I was aware of. A guy got hit in the face. Our guy got hit or struck with a baton in handcuffs. Okay.
It sounds bad.
Sounds terrible. You see the video, it's terrible. It looks terrible. Completely appropriate. And what I mean by that is that in my interpretation of what was going on, it's barely appropriate, because the guy was in handcuffs. Whether he should have been put in handcuffs is not something that I'm, does that make sense? So if he was put in handcuffs illegally, that's not what I'm trying to interpret, because I don't know, right? He's in handcuffs for some reason. He's being detained, right?
You start your analysis here.
Boom. This is where I start, and this is where I end.
Yeah, you don't care about
I care.
where he was born, where all this stuff.
Which is, but so something happened. He's in handcuffs. He starts fighting. Now, why he was fighting, I don't know. I didn't have that conversation, right? But he was in handcuffs, fell down, and then proceeded to strike some of the officers with his feet or whatever. A baton was used. They gave verbal commands. They hit in a target area that they were trained to do. When the person quit striking, they backed up and quit striking.
Were they hitting like vagus nerve or
common peroneal and
okay?
Yeah, and
I think I just used the wrong nerve. Where's the vagus?
That's all right.
In the vagus nerve, like
Vegas is in Nevada.
But isn't there a Vegas?
Get all technical, man. I got a GED, dude. But yeah.
So he's down on the back.
He's on his back,
kicking, and
he's down there kicking. They use a baton. And long story short, when the guy quit kicking the officers, the baton was brought up back. Now, granted, would that be my go-to? No. Okay, like I'm not gonna lie to you. Hey, not my go-to. If I was teaching that, I would not be like, Or if I was the patrol officer there, I wouldn't be like, baton time, you know? But that officer chose to do that, to use that, and they weren't completely wrong. I'm going to say completely. They're not wrong. There's better tactical, you know, and that's, you know, that's a teaching point of like one time I saw a guy build a mailbox, and he picked up each brick and carried it to where he was going to do it. And then I look in his garage and he's got a wheelbarrow. And I was like,
That's a way to do it.
that's a way to do it, right? You're not wrong, but there's a much more efficient way that puts less risk of you having a backache tomorrow, right? So, and that's how I would compare it. Now, I don't want to sit here and say that, like, you know, hitting somebody with because, you know, basically a baton's a big stick. So it's like, it's the oldest defensive tactics technique, right? Big stick, hit, right? But, you know,
So
not
you,
everything
you
looks
basically
good.
just had to say whether or not he was doing something that he was.
They more just ask, is this appropriate or not appropriate? Is this taught, or is a version of this taught? And would you? And sometimes it's, would you teach this, or would you? That's not about approve. Is this a reasonable thing to teach law enforcement officers? And the answer is probably, you know, and whatever the answer is. And then sometimes I don't have enough information to make an educated guess, right, or a statement. And an expert witness doesn't mean that, like, you know everything. You know, it just means like, hey, I've taught for X amount of time, and I've got a master's degree, and I've got all these schools that I've been to. These are the schools I've developed, and I've, you know, developing the schools, I learned a lot more than actually going to most schools, you know. And, you know, because while I was there, I developed a defensive tactics instructor school that helps, like, if tomorrow morning I woke up and I was the chief or the sheriff, which I have no intention of being, I would want to take my program and make it very specific to my agency, right? And say, hey, these techniques are ones that we vetted. So when I say created, I've kind of put together a way to. By the way, I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling, you know,
Link in the description.
buy one, get one free. Yeah. You know,
Call now.
but you know, just kind of to take a technique, and because what happens a lot is that's not what happens a lot. It happens every time. Hey, can we do this? Well, I went to this school and they didn't teach it, so we're not going to use it. Well, that's not the right answer, because you can go to these schools, learn great things, and then develop the program that you want and validate the techniques that's very specific to your agency. So if you look at like a TWRA agent, you know, somebody that's like working, you know, like working wildlife and game, like every time they come in contact with somebody, there's probably a gun there that's not theirs, right? Like if you're out there, you know, if you're the deer police and they're out there with a baseball bat, you're probably going to be asking some questions, right? But you know, like your state parks people, the squirrel police, you know, they're good. Hey, those are the coolest people in law enforcement. Their mission is so drastically different than everybody else that their techniques and their TTPs have to be, not in my opinion. And they got really good training people, and they got really good officers. So I think they're probably, in my opinion, they might be one of the kind of the most well-trained people in law enforcement game, which their mission, again, is drastically different. But what they are training on, or what they should be training on, and what your flex unit at Metro should be training on, should probably be different, because they're getting, you know, different stimuli, you know, different things going down.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that's a good point, because, you know, a lot of people, I think, when they talk about policing in America, they think of it as like homogenous thing, and it's not. It's not just different state by state, city by city, but also like what you just said. If you're a parks officer versus someone who's in a metropolitan city,
Or even get into the parks, like if you're downtown Nashville, you're dealing with you're dealing with big city issues as a park ranger. But if you're at Rock Island, you're going to deal with me doing a backflip off the rock, right? Okay, so, you know, and I'm not doing a backflip off the rock, if anybody's wondering, but the days are over. But anyway, so we came up with this technique, and what we do is we wanted everybody to go to all the schools, you know, and there's agencies out here that, you know, there's a very predominant group, defensive tactics program here that's great. I know the guy that owns it. He's a rock star. He's what I wanted to be, i.e., as far as competency wise, right? And I obviously never got close to him, but he's He's legit.
It's a private school or
No, it's a he owns a business. I don't want to say his name or anything, or because I don't want to bring him any I don't want to bring him any heat if this is not popular.
Yeah.
You know? Like, hey, we hate Travis.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you're in the know in law enforcement, is a giant one. They do great stuff. He's a phenomenal dude. His program is awesome. I'm an instructor in it. I recommend it 10 out of 10. But I also recommend everybody else too, right? Because I've been to ones that were complete trash. I'm talking hot messes. Like, and then there's always one thing that you're like, huh, okay, cool. I got something out of this. Or more specifically, I got something, this is what I don't want to be, you know? But typically there's some legitimacy in everything. And I like to believe that, you know? And then I have went to these conferences and these seminars with people that are like about 45 minutes into, you're like, oh, this guy's a crazy person. Yeah. He's talking about like, you know, there's pressure points that, you know, can knock people out. And I'm just like, have you not seen YouTube? I've seen this YouTube before. You know, the old guys
like that, like energy martial arts where you're like looking at the person, they're falling over.
And then the MMA guy comes in there and just punches him square in the bridge of the nose. Yeah.
Or the, what is it, Detroit urban survival training guy, Dust.
Is that a parody?
It's not ironic. He's doing it seriously.
Oh, I thought that was like a joke. I thought it was like,
and that's what I thought too at first, but no, he actually does it unironically.
What if like that dude like showed up and like whipped your ass though?
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny.
Like,
He's had people come to his school before. There's videos where to do like the disarm and like the disarm won't work, and then they'll like come up with some excuse of why it didn't work or something. It's hilarious.
Well, you can talk about disarming, right? So we would teach that stuff, and people. That's the one thing I got criticized on the most. And realistically, you know, in my career, and again, if anybody has watched this that has been one of the people that criticized me, they're going to get very upset. I don't care. And they'll be like, oh, you know, I think you should do this and this. And I'll listen to them. And then when they just kind of, you know, you get in that cycle, people just want to bitch the entire time, right? And I was like, hold on for a second, I'll be right back. And I'll just never come back. And that's why I quit going to like training conferences, because it's just like, okay, you're so much better than me. Hey, put in application, right? But, you know, and there are people that are better than me. I can think of 2 people right now that if they would have had the educational requirements, they would have beat me. When I say beat me in the interview, I wouldn't put in if they put in, because I've been like, there's no way, bro, you know? But, you know, again, sometimes you have to get a degree to get the job that you want, you know, and that's unfortunate. But anyway, so, but the disarming techniques, right? People would get, you know, irate about like how this technique doesn't work or da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, hey, bro, if we're in a situation where where you're unarmed and they have your gun or they have a gun on you and your hands are in the air, this is the end of the road. Like, you know, this is the worst thing that can happen. Not, you know, there's obviously worse things that can happen, but
you don't have many options at that point.
You really got one, and just go for it every time. Because if you know, you've seen the thing where they put the gun on you and then they're like, get in the trunk of the car, go. Hey, you're getting
taking it to the location 2, and you're
I'll never make it there, because I'm either gonna, you know, I'm going Braveheart on them. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully I don't find myself in that situation. Neither do you. But because in a lot of not agencies, I've been to schools where they spend a dramatic amount of time focusing on the most obscure things, disarming. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. Correction. I'm not saying that you shouldn't focus on that, but like I went to a school that's 40 hours. A day and a half of it was disarming, and I was like, I get it. This is a 12-step process that it took me an hour to figure out, and now I've got it for the time that I'm here. But I mean, you spend a lot of time on something that's, you know, it's if it's an investment, man, you're betting on the penny stock, you know. But anyway, so what we would do is we have this, you know, way to validate, and I came up with a system. I call it components of acceptability for force, right? You know, it's a defensive tactics instructor school. That was, and again, now that I'm doing this Army stuff, I don't know what this looks like, right? I've been asked to teach it, and I'm not opposed to it, but that's another conversation. But it's for the instructor that already has a skill set, right? So, like when I would hire instructors in, it would be on the basis of like, hey, they either have a large collection of like the guy that came from your agency, we hired him.
Mm-hmm.
He replaced me. Great hire. The guy already knew fighting. He was a professional fighter. He was interested in it. It was his hobby. It was his passion. So it was really easy choice. We just, and he had been through the defensive tactics instructor schools that were at the agency that he kind of grew up in. And by the time he got to us, when we hired him, or I hired him, the agency hired him, but I was just, we just had to really clean up his language, not cuss words, but he could teach. He was a black belt at teaching 3 out of the 8 things, and the reason why he wasn't a black belt at the other is because he didn't like them. So he's like, all right, man, we got it. This, now let's teach this, okay? And then
find the things that you're not good at and don't do those things.
Yes, I don't want to teach pressure points either, bro. I outrank you. See ya.
Yeah.
No, but great guy, great hire, So and he was kind of part of this to a certain degree, where what we wanted to be able to do is bring those people in with the skill sets, whether they're at the academy or at your agency, and then once they have like, hey, I know how to do things. Now let's learn. Now let's get. I had to use the black belt now. Let's get that black belt in teaching, because it's a thing, right? And you won't really see it until, correction, the students never see it, right? They come to the academy or whatever academy they go to. Their DT guy or their firearms guy or whomever has said that speech 1,000 times. It's like a comedy routine that you just say over and over again. And they're like, oh, these guys are okay. And then they go to their agency, and you probably saw it at your agency where you're like, all right, these instructors really know what they're talking about. And then you get to a basic in service, and then the guy that doesn't teach very often comes in, and you're like, oh no. And he's like, one time I did this, one time I did that. And I've been guilty of it too, but so teaching's a muscle, teaching's a thing, right? And that's what this kind of does. So this helps you teach, but it also, it can validate your technique. So what you will find in DT, what I found in DT is like, hey, I really like this, but I want this change or add to or take away from, right? And I'm not saying for license reasons or anything like that, is let's see if this really works. So what we did is components of acceptability, 5 parts. Step 1, does it work? Right? Hey, a flying triangle, right? Hey, does it work? If you hit a flying triangle, it works.
Do it correctly.
Yeah, if you do it correctly, man. I mean, I'm not doing a flying triangle, but, does it work, right? Okay. Now, number 2, why does it work? Right? And what I mean by that is if I'm a big, strong guy and I do a technique on you and I just I'm just so much stronger than you that then it'll work, right? If I do the, push you down in a chair and I'm 250 pounds and you're 115, then you're going to be like, hey, if you just put your hand in their chest, they can't get up. That is true. If I'm double
if these things are true.
If these things are true, right? So, and the way I explain that is it works with the big, strong guy that's been doing jiu-jitsu for 20 years. Does it work with the 25-year-old, 130-pound female who has never trained at all? No, cool. So what that makes you do is, what are the reasons why it works? So like, there's a physiological, like if I kick you in the leg in a common peroneal, there's a physiological response to that. Have you ever been kicked in? I'm assuming when you got promoted, you felt in the Marines, you get promoted to NCO, they figure out what the common peroneal is really fast. So, but a couple things happens, right? The physiological reason, there's pain. B, it overstimulates that motor nerve point. Hey, your legs drop out from underneath you, right? And what I'm talking about is getting kneed in the common peroneal. And then, if you do it in the right spot and hard enough, they'll drop, right? So, hey, that works. It does. There's a reason why it works. You don't have to be big, fast, and strong for it to work. So if it passes those muster tests, our third one is an evaluation of risk, right? Because that's the thing. Risk to injury for the officer and for the citizen. Because, and the citizens don't believe this, we don't want to do anything that's going to hurt people.
Right.
Especially permanently. It would be great if we had like a button that, and a taser's kind of a version of this, or electronic device, is that we could just cause you immense pain and then put you in custody and then turn it off, and then there's no
side effects. Yeah.
That would be great, right? It just doesn't exist, right? But what's the risk? If we train this proficiently and train this to a proficient level and not, have unnecessary risk. And that's the thing, right? And, so the next one is, and this is where people get offended. Not offended, but just get kind of like, well, let me tell you something. Can I teach it to you? Right? The teachability of something is a very real thing, right? Because, you're a firearms guy. Firearms guys are, I'm not throwing stones. They're not the worst at this, but they're pretty bad. Like I've been around some like celebrity trainers, right? That are like, I was, Delta Force, and now I'm teaching. Who wants to train with me? Well, the guys are there because they want to hang out. They want to picture on Facebook with you, that not, because the thing that you have that we don't have is that 10,000 rounds to that pistol, and a motivated mindset to do X, Y, or Z. And I've been around some of those guys that are the most not just that unit, but these, high-end specialty guys that are like, they're cool, they're fun, they're motivating. So like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And the fact that they have these experience, that's awesome. But, time on the mat or time at the range, if you don't have that, that's probably never going to work out for you. Mm-hmm. But can I teach somebody something in the amount of time that I have? Right. So in jiu-jitsu, you've trained some in jiu-jitsu, mm-hmm. right? So your first day of jiu-jitsu, you could be the fittest dude in the world, and you're going to go in there and you're going to get lit up. Mm-hmm. And then your second day, you're going to say, won't fall for that one again. You're going to get lit up. Mm-hmm. After about 6 months, you're like, all right, cool. I can probably last a minute or two before they submit me, right? And you fast forward a couple years, and then you realize that they were just messing with you and they could have submitted you at any time, right? Mm-hmm. So
they're just playing with their food.
They're playing with their food. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Yeah, I like that actually. So anyway, can I teach it? And, and some of the stuff is so so difficult and so complex. And, like I think I've referred to it before, step 5 of a 12-step disarming technique. Yeah, I'm not going to remember this one. Okay. And then the last one, if it passed the muster for that, our last one is public acceptability. Very easy way to explain this. Would your mama be mad at you if she saw you do this? Public acceptability is one of those things that probably shouldn't be if we were going to live in a world that doesn't exist, but in reality, it does matter what happens, mm-hmm. right?
What does this look like on CNN?
What does this look like? Is Derek, the George Floyd case where the guy was, and I can comment on this. I don't, you can criticize it all you want. The techniques that he was in were taught to him, mm-hmm. or that were taught. And I don't think he really did anything until he didn't do anything, mm-hmm. if that makes sense, mm-hmm. right? So, like, I don't think anybody had any heartburn with, the circumstances, but when the guy had, if the guy had a medical emergency, and I don't want to dive too deep into that because I didn't, but if you had a medical emergency, obviously you need medical treatment. And if you're sitting on somebody and it's choking them, that's no, right? Mm-hmm. But there are techniques that are very similar to, that look very similar to what that guy was doing that have been taught at the academies that I've been to, that I've taught at, right? But public acceptability, what does it look like? So if you think about like a choke, right? Think about a choke, like rear neck choke, right? How many people have died this year, you think, from rear neck chokes?
Probably
zero.
Statistically zero.
Yeah, pretty hard. Google strangle trials and see how long it takes for somebody to die from strangulation, right? You know what I'm saying? And what you're going to find is jiu-jitsu gyms around the world now that, people aren't dying. And if you really look at the components of acceptability and you apply those to a rear choke, it hits all of the things
except
for the last one. So, hey, does it work? Sure does.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I've thought about this before where they completely removed it, or say you can't even touch the neck after that incident, after the George Floyd incident, you can't even touch the neck now. And I'm like, okay, you are, we have this use of force continuum, which they don't want to call it a continuum, but it still is a continuum.
So a continuum is just a visual representation of resistance and force. That's mm-hmm. all it's intended for.
Right.
It is not supposed to be like a step process.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is like, you've now taken out this sliver of that continuum, and now the gap is not going to stay there. So these other two have to move to close that gap. And now you're basically said, well, when you get to this point in the, not saying it's a step process, mm-hmm. but you've taken that out. So you were going to use this, but you can't use this now because it's no longer there. So now you have to use one of these other ones.
Yeah.
And so now I feel like we've actually put officers and citizens in more risky situation because we won't allow them to do, if you're properly trained how to do a
Yeah.
blood choke. Because if you do that, person goes out, handcuff them real quick, and now they'll come back.
Majority of your DT guys are, you know, that I've had contact with are, you know, when you explain it like this and like the conversation that we're having, they always come to the point where like, yeah, I wish we could teach that. And I know my entire time, like I literally, like when all that happened, I was teaching and I was involved in some of the policy that was coming out at the state level, the state recommendations. And I got to read those, and I don't know if they listened to me or not. I think they did. In one little area, especially the language piece about, you know, vascular chokes, you know, blood chokes, as you were calling earlier. Mm-hmm. What we wanted to do is I wanted to get myself and another instructor and go up on the state floor, and we're going to do rear neck chokes until it's like a filibuster. We'll just knock each other out until they figure out like, this is not dangerous. I mean, it just
that would be fantastic.
Yeah. It's like, hey, number 7. Okay. You know, but you know, but I could describe if I took 125 pound female and put her against a, you know, 250 pound, you know, muscled up person, and she could put herself in a tactical position to take that back and get that choke. 100 out of 100 times she wins that fight, right? Mm-hmm. Because she can put that person into either compliance or incapacitation and put handcuffs on.
Oh yeah, my 12-year-old daughter, if I like put her, I like take my back and put me in a rear naked choke, like within seconds, I'm in. Yeah. I'm like this. I'm in a bad spot.
Yeah, and
I could like get up and slam her against the wall, but you know, it's like you have to act fast, absolutely, or you're going out.
Yeah, night. Yeah. If we do the thought process or the thought idea of like putting ourselves in a situation of a political person that is answering public, mm-hmm, you know, outcry. Look, a loved one gets killed by a police officer, right? And there's an emotional response to that, and that emotional response, you know, typically we make emotional based decisions are typically terrible. Mm-hmm. You know, like, you know, I'm mad and I'm going to say something to right it. Whatever you say is probably the wrong thing.
We have to do something.
Yeah, we have to do something, right? You know, so, you know, I can remember my youngest brother when he went to prison. There was a whole lot of stuff. A lot of people in my family are in jail or in prison or dead. I guess they'll all be dead at some point, right? Everybody, you know. So, but I can remember the officers that arrested him. I knew him, kind of, and I immediately was mad. I was like, these guys, what did they do to him? And I'm sitting there going, my brother, I love him, but he does bad things. He did bad things, right? He's been in prison for a long time, but he did some pretty ridiculous things with guns and drugs and, you know, just bad stuff. But immediately, and hey, I'm like a cop, and I'm like, the first motion I had was those pieces of, you know, and I'm like, I'm glad I didn't say that out loud. I'm glad I don't have a Twitter account or whatever. But so I can recognize that, you know, that people are emotionally, you know, connected to, especially now, to officers choking people and them dying, right? So, you know, I don't know if there's a solution to that generationally because, you know, there's a video of it. And, you know, and if it looks like that person's choking them and it looks like, and then they die, then it's got to be the reason they die has got to be because that officer choked him. It couldn't be for any other 500 million.
Couldn't be all the drugs in their system.
And I don't know that. And I'm not throwing stones at, you know, the deceased by any means of imagination.
But that's just how our society judges it and jumps to conclusions.
Yes, and you know, but those conclusions were jumped to way before all of those things too. I mean, when I was a brand new officer, they were talking about, you know, chokes and, you know, how, you know, it kills people and stuff, and, you know, and everybody that trained jiu-jitsu was like, I hope not. I was at class last night. Maybe I'm dead.
Yeah,
you know. So, but that whole DT thing was. Or that whole components of acceptability thing really gave the officers, gave the agencies the ability to kind of find something that they liked. And then, you know, we call it beta test. And it was really cool because we did it at the academy where we had, you know, 150 volunteers at all times, you know, dying to help us. And we would take somebody that's trained, usually an instructor. We would break them into twos. So team over here. We would give them the technique. And the instructors are not the person that developed the technique, just two people. And then we would give them 3 boys, 3 girls, one big, one medium, one small, all untrained. And then we would bring in a trained person just to kind of see the difference. We teach it to the trained person, usually the instructors, see how they did it. The DT instructors are going to pick up the technique really fast, and then they're going to, tweak it or whatever. And then we would take like the 130-pound girl that just got out of college or just whatever and show it to her, drill it a little bit, and then we would go live with an instructor in a force on force that doesn't know what the technique is, just to see what happens. And if both parties, again, this is not like a double blind placebo. This is just 2 groups of instructors with different body types, with people that have, no real skill. If they come to the same conclusion that it works, why it works, because like there's got to be a reason why, risk, is it teachable, and what does it look like?
During those, did you have any situations where you were surprised by the results?
Absolutely.
What were some?
So one of the biggest ones was a vehicle extraction, right? So everybody's got a vehicle extraction that they like, right? And there's 3 or 4. The one I teach, or the one I like the most, is that we would, and not to get too technical, but we would open up the door, we had go through that piece, and we would push them into the center console. Basically their left arm, if they're driving, across their body, and put our shoulder here. So we would have, so basically, your upper torso is kind of controlling that appendage.
This is the driver you're pushing to the right, towards the passenger.
Towards the passenger, but more back, right?
Okay.
And our thought process is that we still have the ability to disengage if that car starts to move, right? We can then slow it down because we want to slow the process down because it's real easy just to grab their arm and go to the thing and try to break it.
That's very dynamic movement, though.
Terrible idea. Because what if they got their seatbelts on?
Yeah.
Or what if they're trying to give up, right? And anyway. So because we always in the DT world we always got to say when they give up we have to stop. Okay, stop. So so we'd go through, seatbelt, make sure that the car's not in gear or turn it off or both. Slow it down, get eye contact with the suspect, start to talk in a not slow because you're going to be yelling, but it's like, hey man, just stop fighting us, right? Seatbelt, far arm, elbow, and then we come out. And when they come out, their right arm now is going across their body, and they end up on their back outside the car, right? You got to see it, you got to drill it a couple times. Really, all it is grab far arm, bring out of car, right? And it twists the body. The idea is, when your muscles are in concert with each other, when you're doing a lift or when you're picking up something, these muscles have to work together. And if you're ever like, let's say you're on the ground or something like that, and like in jiu-jitsu, if you're new to jiu-jitsu, guys will get on side control and they'll pull your head over and then come to fight, and then you find out like, man, my arms aren't as strong as my legs aren't strong anymore. I can't make it's harder to make dynamic movement with my hips. All of those things are involved in this. And when I first did it, I was like, I like it, but I've been doing this a long time. Let's get one of our other instructors to do it. It worked pretty good. And then we switched a couple things at one of the DT schools. I did this at a DT school, and we went and got a bunch of students. We had them volunteer, like, will you volunteer right now? We call it a manipulative volunteer now.
Yeah.
And we did it a couple times, and I gave them both like 30 minutes to drill it with the students. We didn't tell them what it was. And then we brought in instructors that weren't aware of it and didn't drill it to be the role players and didn't tell them what the scenario was. And they did it. We just said, hey, just lightly resist inside of a car. Okay. And they're like, whoa, that's pretty good. And then we tried, and now what you got to do is you got to try to do it to see what happens. Hey, we need 50 reps at this with, and that's my recommendation. Cause then we've done this, 75 to 150 times, right? We've seen what I'm looking for is, does it, like in that particular one, did it put somebody underneath the car? Right? Did it put somebody coming out of the car head first? All these things are, and it didn't. And they typically went to their back, or if they started to resist in the process, they would end up on their front if they tried to turn their shoulder over. Neither of which put anybody at unnecessary risk. If you're jerking somebody out of a car, though, there's probably something really bad going down. But yeah, that was one example. That's the example that I actually used in the course because we all kind of bet, we're like, there's something not right here. And come to find out, it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Well, and it's because normally they would teach to go for the closest arm.
Sure. And then bend it back.
Right.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is if the person's wearing a seatbelt,
Or
their arm is looped in the seatbelt, but going for this arm, that arm is free of the seatbelt. So it doesn't matter. Once you reach over and you can defeat the buckle and you pull them out, you don't have to worry about it getting hooked on the seatbelt.
Yeah, and our thing is that my whole life has always been slow it down. Or correction, my whole life has always been get them out of the car as fast as possible, and both in SWAT and in patrol and in narcotics. If you've been in the game long enough, you've been around somebody getting jerked out of the car and the car take off down the road. I got drugged one time chasing a shoplifter, and they tried to take off, and I hopped in the window like I was an idiot. Well, again, getting back to I'm an idiot. And next thing you know, like this guy's going across a parking lot and my feet and ass are hanging out, and I'm just, I rip, and I was a young guy then, and I ripped the gear shifter out. I mean, I was scared to death, right? And the guy's like, I'm trying to stop, so as he's hitting the guy. What? That was funny. But anyway, so, in a handful of times, because a lot of times, especially as, in the instructor world, you really look at your past experiences and say, hey, man, like, we should probably address that, right? Or at least that's the way I've always kind of done it. And when we got to this, that's what I was thinking. I was like, is there value in slowing it down? Because we want them out of the car. Our step one, we want to make sure that we don't get in the car and overcommit to being inside of a vehicle that could take off, right? Especially these Teslas and stuff. Like, geez, you see how fast they are? Gosh. But a friend of mine just bought one. He's pressuring me, and I'm not. I refuse. I just don't want a car payment. But anyway, so we don't want to kind of over penetrate the car. We wanted to be able to disengage very quickly, and we wanted to be able to, and I'm a big fan of humanizing yourself to the person that's fighting you, right? Like, hey man, hey, this doesn't have to be this way. And we want to keep it away from being adversarial verbally, because, you've probably been pissed off on a traffic stop and you're like, hey, because there's nothing wrong with saying like, hey, I really would like to punch this guy in the face. Because there's been many, many cases I'm like, oh man, I really wish I could punch this guy in the face. I just can't do it. You know what I'm saying? So, but anywho, but yeah, but for that, it worked out pretty well. We slowed it down, and then we tried to make it to where it wouldn't work. And a couple of the reasons why it wouldn't work were mostly us throwing very, very specific, odd variables into it. A bunch of people in the car, something like that. And sometimes you just can't pull somebody out of the car, or it's not reasonable to, without putting yourself at unnecessary risk. So
yeah, that makes sense.
That's cool.
So you talked about as an instructor, you guys would constantly evaluate and change and adapt, which makes me want to ask you, what do you think makes a good instructor?
I'll start that by saying what makes somebody a bad instructor.
Yeah,
right, is not having the ability to be wrong, right, and not having the ability to answer questions and the why if something happens. When I learn something, I want to know why it works. And I want to know like a legit reason why it works. Not, well, I've done this a bunch of times. Not the answer I'm looking for, right? Teaching is not about you. Teaching is about trying to, have a shared experience that you either have developed or you've learned from somebody else, and then given that, perception or perspective to somebody, because that's really what it is, right? Is you're showing them how to do something if they want to do it, right? The best instructors I've ever dealt with have some humility, and they, I would say, make fun of themselves, but they give the student the ability to react with them in a personal way, right? Not like I'm the bad, because DT guys go, I'm the baddest guy, nobody could take me, nobody, that's gross, man. It might be true though. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's definitely not true. But having some humility and realizing that like this is not about you. This has nothing to do with you. And you are not competing with their other instructors, which is a thing, right? Because whatever agency, like your agency, like I know all those guys and I love them and they're great people. So it wasn't I could just call them and be like, text them some profanity. But it was like, well, this guy said this. Well, he could be right too. You know that there's more than one right answer for everything. And long story short, having the ability to not, not talk bad about other people in the same warehouse, or kind of debunk other people's either legitimate or because you don't really know unless you kind of went through the training. But anyway, the short answer to your question is somebody that is passionate about seeing other people succeed without any benefit, right? And I used to be under the opinion that you should have done it to teach it, and I've thought that for years, because I can remember listening to people that I'm like, you've never even done this before in real life. Why are you teaching it? And now I'm like, that's not true. Teaching, especially in this realm, you don't, teaching is a skill, right? And like, we kind of talking about all these like local, like there's a thing where like, you've probably heard it before, like rock stars want to be actors, actors want to be rock stars, right? And it blows my mind when I say blows my mind, it blows my mind that there's these people out there that are just like there's these shooting schools and these people that are like, dentists and attorneys and, bakers and stuff. And they're, opening tactical schools and stuff like that. And I used to think like, man, what a moron. You know what I'm saying? Like, because they were silly or anything, but I was just like, golly, this is cringy, and then the more I think about it, I'm like, why do I think this is silly? Do I think it's silly because I think I should have done that? No, because I don't want to do that. If somebody wanted me to teach something and I brought value to that, then absolutely I would do that. But, I don't, I'm not, I'm doing this podcast because, you asked me to do it, and you did a solid with my kids at a school, and I think this is a positive thing, but, but I always thought that was not training, but I always thought that was kind of cringy. And now the more I get into it, I'm just like, or the more I think about it, I'm just like, man, who the heck am I to tell somebody what they can or cannot do, And if that brings you joy and it brings you happiness, then man, I'm going to support you. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about you, by the way.
Sure.
Or am I? But, but you were a Marine and you were a cop. I mean, it's not like you were working at, Amazon and you're like, I'm teaching, snipers.
What's interesting, you mentioned that because, I thought about that too. And I actually did a lot of people compare, the firearms industry, teaching fire to like almost like sports too. It's like, well,
sure.
I think most people are, it'd be colloquial to say like, oh, well, you shouldn't teach a sport unless you did the sport.
That's not true.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you know that there's two, I have the note in my phone, but I'll put a link in the description, but there are two Olympic swimming coaches that cannot swim. They taught
that's actually pretty cool.
Olympic swimming teams, and they can't even swim themselves. If they were thrown in the pool, they'd drown.
So if I was,
that's probably the extreme.
Yeah, I would have a good time with
that. But then same thing with like, you have NFL coaches that had never been in the NFL. You have, there's several, I'd say boxing is probably the closest thing to, teaching people how to, shoot and defend themselves with a gun. Most people would think like, oh, well, you probably couldn't be a good boxing coach unless you'd box. But there's several like high level boxing coaches that have never even boxed. One of them was he was the father of this. I can't remember the name now, but he coached his son because his son was getting bullied, and his son ended up being like a successful boxer.
Oh wow!
I'm not a sports guy, but
I
had the note. I can send it to you later. But the so many stories about that are just remarkable, and you're right. It's different when you're teaching something, especially if you have immersed yourself in it, and you're like a true student, and you're like you said, you're humble, and you don't have a bunch of ego in it, and you're willing to admit when you're wrong. There's a guy you might have heard of, Gabe White. He's a shoot. He runs course in Tennessee. This he's a robot. I mean, how he can run one-handed and shoot a bowling pin while it's swinging back and forth. I mean, it's like like magic trick shots. But he's also a phenomenal instructor, and he's but no military experience, no law enforcement experience. He's immersed himself in that sport, and
that's cool. And there's a guy that runs around here, and people just really shit on this guy. I'm not gonna say his name, but they it's kind of weird. But the message is super positive, right? And he's he's trying really hard, and he's not being down on anybody. And it's just like, man, like what? I guess my thing is that, you know, I like to laugh and cut up with people, especially if it's in fun, right? But you know, if somebody's trying at something really hard and they're still putting out a positive message and it's not wrong. So like these people that are teaching these things, they're not wrong. Like what they're teaching is probably not that bad. I mean, they're trying to help people defend themselves, save their life of the loved ones, and be better at, you know, being harder to kill. Okay, hey, sounds great. I'm in. I'm all on board, right? So, but I guess my thing is like, who am I or who or anybody to say what you could or couldn't do? And if you don't want to do it, then don't buy the product or don't subscribe. Or I don't do social media other than like pictures of my kids on Facebook, right? My wife runs all of that. But yeah, no, I don't think that you have to have those experiences, and more so like, you know, we talked a little bit about what I've done in my life, but you know, I should be on paper a really good firearms instructor, but I'm not. I've been, you know, I just don't care. You know, I'm not passionate about it, so I just didn't put the time into it, right?
Yeah.
And that's assuming that I'm a good DT instructor, or I was, but yeah,
You are.
Well, I appreciate that, but yeah, I just don't care nothing about firearms. I like to shoot them, you know. I like to I'm in the Guard, in the Tennessee National Guard, and and I at like 30, golly, 37, 38, I went to IBOLC, which is like infantry officer course. Yeah, I went to become an officer at like 37. Terrible idea. Just joking. It's the best thing I ever did, right? But it was really cool. I say terrible idea because like you're supposed to do it at like 23, you know? So I'm like grandpa going through like this like really hard school. And, but we went out to the machine gun range, and, you know, I was a machine gun dude in the Marine Corps because clearly because I was a big dude and I like machine guns. And I was just out there on the range, and I was like, man, I'm getting paid to shoot 240s for like a week. I was just like,
Yeah.
this is great.
That's awesome.
This is awesome, you know? So, but if I'd tried to teach you how to shoot a pistol, or I could teach, you know, or something, or whatever, it would just be just gross. Cause it'd just be like, point. But yeah, that's odd. It's odd that I never got into that. But anyway.
Well, that's cool. That's I like what you said about the instructor thing. I've asked several people about that. Like, what do you think makes a good instructor? And very similar answers.
Oh, really?
A lot of it has
Cool.
to do with like the ego and someone who doesn't have a lot of ego.
Ugh.
Yeah. And something I was going to ask you about this too, with like law enforcement. A lot of times there's a lot of dogma where they will have these beliefs about something, and it's just so like calcified, and it's hard to break them out of that belief system. And I'm assuming when you first got to Toledo, you experienced some of that with some of the old dogs that were there.
Yeah. They were good dudes though. Like, so don't get it twisted. These guys are not bad, but you know, you only know what you know I know.
Right.
It sounds like a kind of a weird thing, and you know, and it's relevant with, or prevalent too, with some of these, like, you know, instructors that are mostly firearms, because that's what it's kind of like, people like clickbait, right? Is that they, you know, you have something, you've done something for an amount of time, you've received some kind of instruction, and then you like research these like big words that nobody understands, and you just kind of regurgitate like, blah blah blah, thermodynamics, and then all of a sudden, and then they kind of relate everything to this big word that they looked up yesterday, and then they get stuff in their head, and they have, you know, and I've done it myself, is that they're just like buttons. Like, if you say this, then I've got this narrative. Boom. If you say, why doesn't this work? And I'm like, well, technically, blah, 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 you know, and in reality, it's all kind of, I mean, you get something in your head, and if it comes to find out that that thing is wrong, you've got to openly say, hey, like, this, me changing my mind doesn't make me wrong. It just says, hey, something new is relevant. Okay, some new evidence exists. You know, when you're a police officer, you're like, hey, this guy's guilty. And all of a sudden you see this piece of evidence, and you're like, this guy's probably innocent. So, you know, I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah.
You know, there was a time in the world that I thought, going to, like we were talking about earlier, that the majority of the fights go to the ground, which I don't disagree with, that the majority of your training time for DT should be related to jiu-jitsu. I did believe that. I was also training 4 or 5 days a week in jiu-jitsu. So that's the only thing in my head. So, so some of the old stuff, and some of the old stuff comes from bullshit, right? So you've heard like 21 foot rule. Hey, that's not a thing, right? And you've heard of, like, you know, there's some agencies out there that have said like, hey, don't let anybody get within 6 foot, 7 foot of you. What world do you live in where you
Yeah.
can be a police officer?
Good luck.
Yeah. Like, hey, can you stand 7 feet away from me while we talk about your stolen lawnmower? And then that 21 foot rule that came from a news magazine that somebody like me, like it was like a DT guy that, has no real relevance other than if you came through the course, you know who I am. Right. And that's kind of the way I like it, but they asked him in a question. They said, hey, how long would it take you to react to somebody if they had a knife and they were charging at you? I don't know, 21 feet? That's a pretty good guess. Nobody did. That doesn't exist. And I can remember not me demonstrating, but it being demonstrated. And, they'd be like, 21 feet out and they're like, grab the gun and they would try to pull. And even the instructors couldn't, somebody's charging at you, with a knife.
Yeah.
So then you're going to like immediately, or like, remember like the OODA, like if I don't even want to say it because like these instructors would just say it over and over and over again, and I would be like, and then once I started teaching, people would be like, according to the, and I'm just like, please stop, it's obnoxious. But did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to be able to change your mind and not like prioritize the truth over your ego. I think a lot of I've noticed several instructors within the law enforcement community do the opposite. They prioritize their ego over the truth, and then when you bring up valid points, it's almost like you're challenging them and not like not something else, not some other.
It's hard to do though, because
it's very hard to do.
It's hard to do, and you're teaching, and and I taught, and you say something, and they're like, hey, what about this? And you're like, who in the hell do you think you are?
Yeah.
And then you're like, all right, I gotta chill out now. Okay, yeah, I'll look into that. Or saying I don't know. Or saying the fact of like, and this was a big thing. And even I know when you went through, I'm sure I was saying it because I've always said it, is like, hey, this is going to work until it doesn't anymore. Right. This could work or, until it doesn't. And, we always call him like Bubba because we're from Tennessee. But like, at some point you're going to find out, somebody's going to grab a hold of you and they're going to pick you up and throw you across the road. That's a really good idea to go ahead and create a lot of space, i.e., a train feature.
Yeah.
Because there's superhuman people out there, right? And I'm not talking like, supernatural or anything, but like I've got a cousin. He drinks beer and he every day and smokes cigarettes and it's never worked out. And I saw him deadlift 550 one time.
Good gosh.
And a pair of tennis shoes and some blue jeans. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was, we were older too.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is that,
sometimes the disparity of force is so large that like
yeah.
none of those techniques are going to work. And if compliance is going to probably come from the gun or some other.
It could intermediate or whatever the situation is. I mean, he's a sweetheart though, but,
not your brother.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a cousin of mine. But,
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the old instructor stuff is, it's touchy because people are married to things and the people are they identify and their identity is behind some of these things. So, I would imagine if you know me on a personal level, you probably know that I was a cop, but you might not. Right. And I'm not saying that like I try to act like I'm not something, but law enforcement was never my identity.
Many people do find their identity in that.
I get it though, right? You work on a shift, you hang out with these same people. A lot of these cops get married to each other for a very short amount of time. And then, and then they get divorced and they hate each other, but that's who you hang out with, that's who you identify with. And I can't imagine when you were a young cop. I know when I was a young cop that like, my neighbors would be like, hey, do you know this guy? This happened. Can you help me out? I'm just like, hey, blah.
Yeah.
But I watched, I don't want to say names, but I watched an older generation because when I came into law enforcement, the old generation dudes were old school, right? Like super old school. And I watched them retire in some capacity. And it wasn't good, right? They only identified with police officers. They only had friends that were officers. And then when they stopped, they died.
Yeah.
And they didn't have, I can remember being at at a restaurant with a bunch of my supervisors, and a bunch of old cops come in there that had just retired like within the last 5 or 6 years, and they were elderly men, and I was like, he was like, oh, I was the patrol captain here. I was like, I'd seen his name on paperwork. I was like, oh, okay, like, is he like 500 years old?
Wow. Yeah.
But there's the culture, and the alcohol and the unfortunately, a lot of people in this profession are, their own wife number 7 or something by the time they're my age, right? And I think that probably has a toll on their mental health, especially.
Yeah, I've wondered if especially with the death rate happening so quickly after the retirement, I've wondered if that's part of, I mean, this could be speaking way outside my expertise, but
Right.
if someone identifies more and more with the thing that they do, and that is their identity, that is
Sure.
who they are, then when they leave it, that part of them has died, and then their body's like, well, I guess I'm done now, and then they just die.
Yeah, I don't think that's wrong. I mean, I don't have anything but what I can say is that a lot of us talk about mental health, but the mental health piece of this, like I've got friends that are, so like you talk about going armed, right? And I'll just say this because, and I mean, if you know me, you know me, but I don't carry a gun everywhere I go.
Mhm.
I don't, and if I went to Walmart and I didn't have a gun, so like in the morning, sometimes I like to wake up and I like to row or I like to run, right? And then especially if I'm not working that day or something, I'll realize, hey, I don't have any food, and I'll go to Walmart or somewhere like that, Publix. I'm going in a pair of PT shorts and a tank top and a hat on, right? If I don't have a gun, I don't. It's not like I'm not having a panic attack, right? I don't. I know people that can't live that way, and that's okay. I'm not criticizing them, but I remember when we were young, and I said the generation that I came in law enforcement with, and then I know some of those people to this day, and a lot of them have changed, and I wouldn't say in a great way, right? Some of them have never dealt with mental health issues, and some of them have, and I say post traumatic stress disorder. Clearly, I'm not a doctor, clearly, but I'm a friend, right? And I've seen people get in these headspaces where they think that the world, everything's out to get them, or they criticize everything in their life, to include themselves, right? And I think that they've walked around in like a red or an orange for so long that's the only place they can operate in, and I'm thinking about somebody in particular, like, they think that, they go out to restaurants, like, oh, that person saw me, that person could probably recognize me, and they're probably going to mess with my food, right? I mean, is that,
Yeah.
are you that important? And B, that's, the guy working at Chick-fil-A is just trying to get paid. Yeah, they say at your service, man. What else do you want? You know what I'm saying? Or whatever. But the mental health piece is kind of hard. And when you're dealing with people that are, hyper vigilant all the time, it scares me. And it scares me, not because I'm scared of getting hurt or anything, but it scares me because it's like, these people started this profession, probably under really good pretenses, and then a lot of times when they leave, it's not the way they want to leave, and that sucks.
Yeah.
Because you want to, and it's a culture thing, right? It's because like I was at the academy, right? So I was at the academy for and I want to say it was there's no such thing as a big deal, but I was a big part of that place for a very long time. And when I walked out of there, I didn't quit. I went to another agency. I mean, I went to another. I was in the state, and I transferred to another state agency. Went back to the field, looking to get back into the fight, because I don't think you're supposed to be in the training realm, just in the training realm, for a very long time. I was there for like 7 or 8 years. That's too long, right? I was talking about stuff that I hadn't done in 5, 6, 7 years. Like, what? I was, and I saw a problem with that, and it probably was like that imposter syndrome, where you're just like, because I don't really care what they're saying about me, but I don't want to be lying to them, and I don't want to lie to myself, right?
Sure.
But when I left there, I was like, hey, I'd come up as an instructor and got into supervision, and I was, I had hired, when I say hired, I'd been a part of the hiring process with almost everybody there at that point, with minus 2 people. And like I left, and I think I took a week off from my last day until I went to work at the agency, where I had to like, put a suit back on and be like a real cop again, which is a great opportunity. And when I left the academy, I remember the bosses and stuff were like, "Hey, when's your last day?" I was like, "Today." And I thought it was a joke, because I thought they were at least going to like, and what I used to do when the people retired, I would bring beers, not in my work car.
Yeah.
But when they got done, I was like, "Hey, let's go on top of the hill and have a beer." Because if you've been to Toledo, there's a hill on the back, and the hills. If you've been through that place, you've been there, right? And you go to the top and you drink a beer and say, "Hey, man, safe travels." Because that's, I'm not going to buy you a plaque or buy you a leather jacket or something, but we can have one last, we can have a beer together, not in work clothes, not in work, no guns, and then. And next time we see each other, we're friends. We're not, "Hey, we used to work together. Hey, that's my friend." Right? Okay, that's the way I thought I'd think about stuff.
Yeah.
But when I left, I was like, "Oh, this last day." I was like, "Oh, they're at least gonna, hey, nothing." And I didn't want anything, but I was just like,
That is
"Man."
kind of weird.
It was just kind of, if I have a feeling, it was kind of sore after that, because I was just like, "Wow, man, like, I spent a long time there," and yeah. It was very, very odd.
Yeah. Well, and there's an important, I don't know, lesson, principle, whatever you want to say, in that, those situations, a lot of times people invest so much of their life into that job, and then I'm not saying you did that. I'm saying that, sometimes people, and then they forget that, like, when you leave, they're just going to fill your position and they're going to move on, and it's your family that's going to be there for the rest of your life. So like the importance of like prioritizing your family in those situations, and understanding that like that unit, that agency, that department, whatever, like you are a number. Now you have friends, right, that care about you.
And I still do. And I'm not.
Yeah. But I think that's just,
it was very odd, and it's not that it hurt my feelings. It embarrassed me, because I thought like, "Oh, they're, we're gonna, have a card, eat, hey, nothing." And I was just like, man, I was like, I'm embarrassed, because I like maybe thought I was a bigger deal. I thought maybe I was.
I think it's just also common decency for like,
no, it's fine. And again, the circumstances of what was going on at that time, I'm sure they had other things going on. But I had left an agency like what I had worked at for 10 plus years, that this large sheriff's office in Middle Tennessee. Dude, when I left there, man, like I was like crying. And like the people that were in the unit with me, hey, we're still friends today. I mean, it's odd. Like, the people that are in administration at this agency, like, hey, I'd kill for them. You know what I'm saying? And even when I left and went to the state, which is, hey, I still had access to the building. They invited me in, welcomed me. I could leave here right now, go there, and they would, granted, there are people that hate my guts. I am positive of that, and if you're listening to this, punch yourself in the face. But I love those people to this day. And there's people at the academy that I still love to this day. And a lot of them have moved on, and that's good. And they're doing great things. And the people that hired me there didn't work there when I left. Right. I get that. But I just, it was a little like, wow. And I remember telling myself like, hey man, they'll replace you before your body gets cold. And I left, they didn't fire, you know what I'm saying? So it's not like they slated me in any way. I was just like, yikes. I mean, I guess it's like you tell everybody you're getting a new bike Christmas morning. You're like, oh no, guess those Santa Claus was running behind. But it's funny. But yeah. But I don't know where I was going with that.
That's cool.
Other than, I think if anybody was listening to this, the dudes that are walking out the door, you should not make a big deal about it, but you should make a deal about it. Because I watch people walk out the door under good, circumstances. And I've watched people, when I say walk out the door, if you get fired, you're not getting a party. Like, hey, Travis got indicted this month. So I'm going to get away party before his arraignment, right? But if you were, but when people retired, I didn't realize how big of a deal that was. And I'm not retired, but I'm, I'll make it. I will go to a retirement ceremony today. I'll break plans to go to somebody's retirement ceremony. And I suggest that anybody that has the ability to do that, because it does mean something to people,
Yeah, I think that is important. I remember there's some buddies that I had when they would leave and I would be like, because nothing ever, especially if it's not a retirement. If it's a retirement, it's usually more of a big deal. But even
Sure.
if they just left after a few years,
That's still a thing.
yeah, there's still a thing. And I'd be like, hey, well, let's go to lunch or something. Let's go
Lunch,
do
yeah.
something. I'll, lunch on me. But I do agree with that.
Yeah.
People remember that, and it's not for that reason.
It's
but
for them. It's not for you.
It's for
Yeah.
them exactly. And yeah, I think that is important. What advice would you give to newer cops?
Oh, perfect. It's easy. Yeah. I've given this advice 1,000 times, maybe even more than that. Take your first year, right? Get through your academy, get through your training. That's not real. Okay. That's all fake. Sorry, I got an itch in my ear. Your police academy is, it's not, it's a great place. It's fun. It's not real. That's not the world that you're going to be living in. All right. By yourself in a car. I'm assuming you're patrol, right? Learn the roads, spend that first year to where when they call your number or however they dispatch you, you're not like, or, oh gosh, I can't, and that comes in like one day you wake up and you're like, what kind of, like you haven't run into a call that you at least don't know how to handle. Right. So that's when your time starts.
Mm-hmm.
And then say, hey, I want to, write down the 5, couple things that you want to do. For me, it was work some kind of drugs, ICE that we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
like, which is our interstate, like interstate interdiction unit, and SWAT. And then spend the next year and do not talk about it. Right. And what I mean by that is really get an idea of what you want to do. Because like, see if what you want to do is actually what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So like you say, like a lot of people, and at the academy, we would always say like, I want to write search warrants and take down Well, you want to be a city detective. That's what you want to be, not a DEA agent. Because these DEA agents are sitting in a wire listening to a phone call in South America right now. So like actually see what you want to do. So long story short, and then I would spend double the amount on patrol before you put in for a detective that you feel is appropriate. What I mean by that is this. The guy I was telling you about, my uncle, he was a cop for 30 years in it, like south of here. His best stories, he was a slick sleeve patrolman. The times when he reminisces, he drinks too much whiskey and he starts telling good stories. All of them, none of them are about being a murder detective. None of them are about being the chief. None of them are about policies and budgets. And I brought new car. Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of them was me and this guy that he doesn't know anymore did this on this date and this is what happened. Right? That's all. And I look back at my life, and I'm not that old. I'm in my mid 40s, and I look back and I say, hey, I had a really good time answering calls for service, dealing with new people, and solving problems every day. And while you're being a police officer, those are the glory days. Those are the best times. And granted, I have a great time as being a detective and an agent and stuff. Absolutely, that was great. But all my stories come from what? Patrol, right? And that's where the fun times were. And then when you get to patrol, and then because if you get somewhere too fast, and that's just my opinion, if you become there's detectives out there that's been, they got 5 years on the job and they're a detective. Hey, I don't care how much experience you have. 5 years of, like, come on, dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's and it might just be culture, right? Because there's dudes out there that have 5 or 6 years experience and they talk like they got 30. And, one of my mentors used to say, hey, it takes 20 years to get 20 years experience. And I wrote it up in my office when you went through, on my wall, it said, it takes 20 years to get 20 years experience. But that's what I tell them is, hey, enjoy the ride, man. Because like being a patrol officer, work midnight shift, work weekends. Hey, beer tastes the same on Tuesday and Wednesday as it does on Friday and Saturday. Who cares? You're not in high school anymore. Right. And then, and once they hit that 5 to 10 year mark, you got to make a decision. Are you going to make a career out of this or not? Right. And if the answer is no, go do something else. That's my opinion. Right. And if it is going to make a career, figure out, do you want to be a specialist or do you want to be a generalist in supervision? Every agency has their drug guy, murder guy or woman who has spent their entire life doing very similar things. And there's so much pride and awesomeness in that. But about 5 to 10 years in, if you decide, or 5-7 years in, if you decide like, hey, I want to make a run at being the boss and invoke change at a policy level, then, if you spend your 30s and half of your 40s being a weird drug detective, then you can't get mad when the guy that started 5 years after you is your boss.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I've got friends that are very high in the police department in Rutherford or in the sheriff's office, and I have friends that are, one of my very, 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 very close friends. He's 28 years old. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he's a big fat pig. If he knows what I'm talking about, then, but, if you choose not to get into supervision, which is a very good, it makes perfect sense to me. You should probably okay, I'll just say it. You can't bitch about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? If you want to be the boss, like I'm an officer in the Army. Part of the reason why I did that is when I talked about being the as a prior enlisted NCO, one of the guys that talked me into it was a colonel, prior staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. And he says, he's like, "Are you gonna be an officer?" I was like, "Nope, can't say it. I don't particularly care for officers." Right. And, the Marine Corps officers are a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, "Hey, if you want to invoke change, there's only really one place to do it." And he's not wrong. So like when I was platoon leader and stuff, I was just like, "Hey, my mission, obviously my mission was X, Y, or Z. I was an infantry guy, but my real mission, not a mission of mine, a priority, I guess you would say of mine, is to cut out the BS. Yeah. And, hey, if things don't make sense, let's not do it." And some people like that. Some people didn't. I equally didn't care, but I went all the way around the world to kind of tell you like, hey, you got to make a decision. And if you make the decision to be the specialty guy, then when you get passed over for promotions that you can't put in for, then that's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the guys and girls that took the path of, lieutenant, captain, major, they made that decision too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to criticize people for making a decision, but if you didn't put yourself in the position to be able to make that decision, then you just need to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's kind of, hopefully.
Yeah. No, it does.
If that offends anybody, then no.
Oh, well.
Who cares? Yeah.
Well, Travis, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Man, this has actually been I feel like this is like therapy that I didn't pay for.
I'm a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate it though. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, train to a higher standard.